Chapter 101. Surprisingly, the first person to reject was Empress Dowager Ida. Xianli, who had been acting as if he had nothing to do with it, was stunned. The gentle smile on his face froze for a moment. Everyone else was puzzled, but Jiang Xing secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Since Empress Dowager Ida had spoken, even the emperor would not easily refute it. No matter how much Imperial Consort Chen was favored, the emperor would never go against Empress Dowager Ida's wishes for her. Imperial Consort Chen's life in the palace had always been smooth sailing. She didn't have any conflicts of interest with Empress Dowager Ida. In addition, she had an excellent reputation in the palace, so everyone liked her. Other than the Empress Dowager Ida was not close to these concubines, so they had been living in harmony. Who would have thought that today, in front of all the civil and military officials and their families, this most distinguished woman of the great Jin dynasty would mercilessly refute her suggestion? If it had been Empress Dowager Ida, then it would have been fine. But Jiang Yuan had actually refused as well. What was wrong with her? The corners of Imperial Consort Chen's lips curled into a smile as she re-examined Jiang Yuan. Initially, she had observed that Jiang Yuan was able to advance and retreat appropriately. Her mannerisms did not seem to be those of an unfavored young miss of the minister's household. In addition to Xian Li's evaluation of her, she also believed that Jiang Yuan was only a somewhat intelligent young girl. But now, it seemed that not only was she smart, but she was also very bold. Meeting Imperial Consort Chen's smiling gaze, Jiang Yuan also smiled back. Her smile was humble and calm, as if it contained a different kind of emotion in her eyes. Imperial concubine Chen's movements became slightly sluggish. This was the first time she had encountered such a gaze in the world. That was provocation. Yet, his provocation was filled with the determination to win. Empress Dowager Ida's sudden words caused Xiao Xiao, who was about to get up, to stop. Ah, Mo Zong said in surprise, doesn't the Empress Dowager, the senior, never care about these trivial matters? That's strange. Could it be that the eldest miss of the Jiang family is so adorable that even the Empress Dowager treats her differently? Xiao Xiao looked pensive as his pitch-black eyes locked onto Jiang Yuan. Jiang Yuan never did things that she was not sure of. She had long expected that Empress Dowager Ida would refute her. But, how did she know? Everyone present was puzzled, but no one had the guts to ask the question in their hearts. Jiang Yuan's gaze turned slightly cold. Naturally, she knew why. Imperial Consort Chen thought that she was absolutely safe, so in front of all the civil and military officials, she unscrupulously proposed to take her into the 8th prince's residence. However, her attire and appearance today were extremely similar to Princess Yuanrong's. If it was anything else, it would have been fine, but it just had to be marriage. In such a situation, how could Empress Dowager Ida not think of the past when Princess Yuanrong was forced to marry into another country? She had purposely dawdled like that, appearing embarrassed and unwilling. Wasn't it to remind Empress Dowager Ida, to remind her that Princess Yuanrong had sacrificed her own happiness all her life in exchange for the stability of the great Jin dynasty? How could Empress Dowager Ida remain indifferent to a forced marriage? Empress Dowager Ida would sympathize with her, but at the same time, she would loathe Imperial Consort Chen from the bottom of her heart. No matter how much Imperial Consort Chen was favored, after offending such a noble woman in the imperial palace, how could she be as successful as she was in the past? Life was so precious, and she lived every minute and every second of it within her calculations. How could she be reconciled to the marriage proposed by Imperial Consort Chen? Imperial Consort Chen did not speak, but only looked at the emperor with a pair of beautiful eyes. That pair of watery eyes seemed to be covered with the misty rain of the Jiangnan water village, aggrieved and sad. With just one look, it made one's heart ache. As expected, the emperor said, "Imperial mother, why? Aijia wants to reward the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu today." The meaning of Imperial Consort Chen's words is not to reward, but to plunder. Empress Dowager Ida said indifferently. Her tone was already somewhat sharp. The eldest daughter of the Jiang family is Deputy General Zhang's treasure. How could he be willing to marry off his own younger sister so early? Jiang Xing was startled, but in his heart, he was somewhat grateful to Empress Dowager Ida. Without caring about anything else, he stood up and bowed deeply to the Empress Dowager. Many thanks for Empress Dowager's consideration, but this general is indeed unwilling to betroth my younger sister so early. There was a sudden sigh in the hall. No matter what Empress Dowager Ida said, she was, after all, the Empress Dowager, and what she said was not important. However, Jiang Xing had just performed a meritorious deed, yet he had already refuted the emperor's most beloved imperial consort. Both brother and sister did not know what was good for them. It was simply ridiculous. Naturally, Xia Yan was extremely delighted. She couldn't wait for Jiang Xing and his sister to fiercely offend imperial consort Chen. It would be even better if they provoked the emperor so much that he would order them to die. On the other hand, Jiang Su's face regained some color. When she had first heard that imperial consort Chen had taken a liking to Jiang Yuan to be the 8th prince's wife, she had almost fainted. She could not understand why such a cultured, refined, and outstanding man would want Jiang Yuan, that sinister and cruel orphan with a face full of foxy charm, to be the imperial consort. Now that the Empress Dowager had stopped her, she slowly regained her composure. Needless to say, Jiang Li's eyes were full of jealousy. She was jealous of Jiang Ruan's luck, and hated herself for not having such an accomplished older brother. Jiang Dan, on the other hand, lowered her head and vigorously picked at her fingernails. She looked extremely nervous. Zhao Guang had just calmed down when he was startled by Jiang Xing's words. Guan Lianghan frowned and muttered, "Sister maniac." Being so protective, those who don't know would think that she's his daughter. Even the emperor's eyes flashed with a trace of displeasure. It was true that Jiang Xing had performed meritorious deeds, and he also admired this brave and resolute young man. However, this did not mean that he could tolerate Jiang Xing's disrespect towards the imperial consort. If there was no imperial power in his eyes, then even an astonishing talent could not remain in the Jin Kingdom's court. Under the many disapproving gazes, Jiang Yuan turned her head to look at Jiang Xing and smiled lightly. No matter what happened, in this life, she still had Jiang Xing by her side. He would stand by her side without any leeway. Even if he had to go against the whole world, he would not hesitate to protect her. Jiang Xing saw that Jiang Yuan could still smile, and his heart was somewhat relieved. When Imperial Consort Chen heard Empress Dowager Ida's words, she giggled. That's true, this concubine had actually forgotten about this matter. It's just that Deputy General Jiang, no matter how much you dote on Miss Jiang, there will be a day when that Miss Jiang will marry, won't there? She looked at Jiang Yuan with a smile. Her gaze was like the continuous drizzle of Jiangnan, with the slight chill of early spring, pervasive and slowly drilling into one's heart. Imperial Consort Chen said, "Miss Jiang, why are you unwilling? Yuanyang's status is lowly, and I really feel that I am not worthy of His Highness's dragon and phoenix emblem. I am ashamed." Jiang Yuan lowered her head, and her tone was quite sincere. Xian Li's gaze moved. Jiang Yuan was clearly making up an excuse. How could Jiang Yuan be someone who felt lowly? He was also puzzled. Why did a little girl who was still wet behind the ears always have a faint hostility towards him? Xianli believed that in everyone's hearts, he had a gentle and amiable appearance, and that countless women adored his gentle jade-like appearance. Even though Jiang Yuan was still young and did not understand the relationship between a man and a woman, where did this hostility come from? Had he ever behaved improperly in front of Jiang Yuan? Could it be because of Jiang Su? Thinking of this, he slowly relaxed. If it was only because of Jiang Su, it would be very easy to gain her trust. Imperial Consort Chen sighed softly, "Child, what are you talking about? If Xiao Ba had not personally come to ask, why would I suddenly bring up this matter?" Everyone was shocked. It was actually the 8th prince who had taken the initiative to bring it up. Xian Li frowned and put away the gentle and refined smile on his face. He got up and walked into the hall. His brows were handsome, his bearing was refined, and he carried the unique noble and gentle temperament of the royal family. His face was solemn as he solemnly knelt down in front of the emperor, reporting to Imperial Father, "This is exactly what I was thinking." He glanced at Jiang Ruan, and his expression became somewhat gentle, like the spring breeze in early spring. "When I saw eldest Jiang Miss on Ling Long boat, I was overwhelmed by her brilliance and beauty. After returning to the palace, I fell in love with her for 4 years. I was afraid that eldest Jiang Miss would blame me for being impetuous, so I asked Imperial Mother to help me. Xianli said, I am willing to take eldest Jiang Miss as my wife, to care for her, protect her, and love her for the rest of my life." He turned to Jiang Ruan and slowly enunciated each word, "Miss Jiang, are you willing to be my, Xianli's, wife?" Such a handsome young man was professing his love in front of all the civil and military officials. Moreover, he was the 8th prince, who had always been clean and virtuous. Countless young ladies present loved and hated him at the same time. They loved such a handsome man with outstanding bearing and deep feelings. They hated that they were not the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu and had such great luck. After listening to the 8th prince's words, Jiang Su was on the verge of collapsing. At first, she had been secretly delighted, but now, it had been replaced by a bone-deep hatred. She had never been as jealous of Jiang Ruan as she was right now. A crazy jealousy. What right did Jiang Ruan have to snatch away her status as the eldest daughter, and also to snatch away her sweetheart? Jiang Ruan looked at Xianli indifferently. Since her rebirth, Xianli was like a fly that had eaten into her stomach. She always avoided him as much as she could. This was the first time she was so close to him. There was clearly not a trace of ease in his eyes, but the words he said were so moving and sincere. In a trance, time flowed back, and she returned to her previous life. The peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley were pink and passionate. She did not know what to do. Xianli stood under the peach blossoms and looked at her with a gentle and considerate smile. He said, "Ruan, I really like you. I really like you." His words were so pleasant to hear. He only said that he liked her, but did not mention marriage. He said that he could not give her a status, so she believed him and was considerate of his difficulties. In her previous life, how she wished she could hear Xianli say, "Are you willing to be my wife?" In order to become his wife, in order to be worthy of a word of his love. She wronged herself by entering the murderous palace in place of Jiang Su. She was abused, humiliated, ridiculed, and ruthlessly trampled into dust. How could he turn a blind eye? When he finished using her, he announced that she was a demoness who brought calamity to the country. When he saw her fall miserably in the main hall, did he remember that day in Ningshui Valley, under the peach tree, those words, "Ruan, I really like you." In this life, she finally heard those words, "Are you willing to be my wife?" But so what? She no longer cared about it. Xianli looked at Jiang Ruan. He was confident that Jiang Ruan had not been doted on by her father since she was a child. Her mother had died early, and she had lived in a rural residence for 5 years. For such a person, as long as someone treated her a little better, she would be deeply grateful and like them. It was very easy to move her heart. But as he looked at Jiang Ruan, his smile suddenly and slowly froze. What kind of a pair of eyes were those? They were as beautiful as a clear spring in a mountain stream, but they were as desolate as black poppies that bloomed in a wasteland. The emotions surging in those eyes were intense yet calm. It was not love or affection, nor did it belong to any kind of joy. It was not love, it was hate. Xianli stared blankly. He had not seen wrongly. It was hate, a hate that seemed to be in the bones, a hate that could not wait to devour his flesh and blood and drink his blood. And within that hate, there was a kind of disgust, as if he was some rotten thing. His expression slowly froze. Why? Under such a strong emotion, complicated gaze of love and hate, Xianli's mind was a kind of blank, as if he did not know how to face it next. Facing Jiang Ruan's gaze, his heart unexpectedly gave birth to a faint fear. Why was this?
He tried his best to figure it out, but then he saw the young girl in front of him suddenly reveal a sneer at him. With a faint sneer, she said in a powerful and resonant voice, "I am not willing." Jiang Ruan proudly raised her chin. Her tone was clearly humble, but her expression was like that of a high and mighty princess. "I am indebted to your highness's kind intentions, but this subject's daughter's ambition does not lie here. Your highness's words have caused this subject's daughter's heart to be frightened, and I really do not dare to claim such a high position." As she finished speaking, she bent down and kowtowed to the emperor. "I hope that your majesty will grant my wish." No matter how passionate Xian Li's words were, her heart was like stone, and her posture remained unmoved.
The smile on Imperial Consort Chen's face deepened, and the light in her eyes fluctuated. Unexpectedly, she did not appear to be angry at all. Although the emperor was angry at Jiang Ruan's unappreciative action, he could not force Jiang Ruan to agree to Xian Li in front of all the civil and military officials. He waved his hand somewhat irritably. "Since this is the case, it means that you and Lao Ba are not fated to be together." Xian Li's expression did not look good. He did not expect that today's matter, which he had a well-thought-out card up his sleeves, would be ruined by Jiang Ruan's cold and hard words. He looked at Jiang Ruan inquiringly. He really did not understand why Jiang Ruan had rejected him without even thinking. Her expression did not loosen in the slightest, so why did she reveal such hatred towards him? If it was only for Jiang Su, why did she hate him so deeply? Jiang Ruan took in Xian Li's expression and sneered silently in her heart. In this life, he still used the same method as in her previous life, hoping to buy her heart and let her work for him. How could there be such a cheap thing in this world? Did Xian Li think that just because he was willing to condescend to deceive others, others should be deeply grateful to him? Mo Tsong shook his head, and said in a rather regretful tone, "This eighth prince is really infinitely romantic. Unfortunately, he met the Jiang family's poisonous Mississippi. He is destined to be ignored." Xiao Xiao looked at Jiang Ruan indifferently. Those who practiced martial arts had good eyesight. Just now, he had clearly seen the gaze that Jiang Ruan had used to look at Xian Li. There was not the slightest trace of love in it, but the hatred made people feel somewhat puzzled. How could she hate Xian Li so much? For a moment, it made people feel as if she had almost disappeared, as if she did not originally belong to this world. Suppressing the thoughts in his heart, Xiao Xiao suddenly frowned. His many years of intuition made him sensitive to the fact that something was wrong in the air. He gently pressed the dagger at his waist. During the palace banquet, officials were not allowed to carry weapons, but he was an exception. The emperor made an exception and allowed him to bring one. Xian Li and Jiang Ruan bowed and regretfully returned to their seats. Their sad appearance made the palace womenfolk feel extremely distressed. On one hand, they rejoiced that Jiang Ruan had not accepted Xian Li, but on the other hand, they secretly cursed Jiang Ruan for not knowing what was good for her, for making such a celestial being sad. Jiang Ruan and Jiang Xing smiled slightly. After this incident, the emperor's mood had also been greatly disturbed. With a wave of his hand, he said, "Begin the banquet." The palace maids serving the dishes entered in a line, each carrying a tray in their hands. Among them, the palace maid in the lead had a graceful figure, clear and elegant features, and was dressed differently from the other palace maids. Behind her were two palace maids dressed differently, each of them carrying a tray as they walked towards the emperor. One of them stood in place, while the other two began to pour wine for the empress and empress dowager. The palace maid beside the empress took out silver chopsticks and prepared to dip them in the wine. The palace maid in the lead was in the midst of pouring wine. Her hand had just lifted the wine pot when she suddenly pulled out a dagger from under the white cloth and ruthlessly thrust it towards the emperor's chest. With a "chi" sound, a strong gust of wind mixed with something came over, causing the palace maid's dagger to deviate and miss the fatal spot. Unexpectedly, it was a golden button. On the high seat, almost at the same time, Xiao Xiao flew up and rushed towards the emperor's side. Guan Lianghan's expression froze, and he fiercely slammed the table and stood up. The surrounding matrons had never seen such a scene before, and they all shrieked in alarm. The palace maids dressed in pink were simultaneously startled, and a few of them suddenly flew up, pulling out the flexible swords hidden at their waists, and rushed straight towards the emperor's face. "Dog Emperor, hand over your life," the women shouted. They had actually mixed in with the palace maids serving the banquet. There were at least a few hundred palace maids serving the palace banquet today, and with such chaos, the palace hall was in a complete mess. The emperor was greatly shaken, and the imperial bodyguards desperately shouted, "Protect the emperor! Protect the emperor!" The emperor's side was protected impeccably, but the assassins did not limit themselves to only taking the emperor's life. They actually started a massacre in the palace hall, killing whoever they caught. The women's side of the banquet were all defenseless women and young ladies, and the assassins specifically targeted the women's side of the banquet. For a moment, only the sound of flesh and blood could be heard, and screams and shouts could be heard incessantly. Just by listening to the sounds, one could tell how desperate the situation was. Jiang Su had long been so frightened that she hid under the table, watching as a dainty young lady was chopped into 2 pieces before her eyes. She was so frightened that her face was ashen, but her temperament was much steadier than Jiang Li, who only knew how to scream. Xia Yan was also scared to death. She hugged Jiang Su in her arms and hid under the table. The two of them hid under the corpses, and at a glance, nothing could be seen. Jiang Dan was also scared to death, but she did not hide, nor did she scream like Jiang Li. In the midst of the chaos, she unexpectedly showed a trace of calmness. After thinking for a moment, as if she had made up her mind, she lifted her skirt and ran towards the men's side of the banquet. No one had expected such an unforeseen event, and the emperor had been moved extremely quickly. They had originally thought that the assassins would stop, but who knew that they would be so deranged as to kill without hesitation. When the palace hall was in chaos, it was even easier for something to happen. In the midst of the chaos, Jiang Xing could no longer see Jiang Ruan's figure. However, as the deputy general, he could not abandon a room full of women and children. He could only help the poor resist the assassins while he secretly searched for Jiang Ruan's figure. The sons of the Zhao family also joined in the battle, but who knew that these assassins also seemed to have received sophisticated training. They were not in a hurry to deal with people who had martial arts skills, and they specifically made their way towards the women and children. The imperial bodyguards and generals had to consider that they could not accidentally injure the families of the courtiers, so it was inevitable that they would show mercy. This gave these assassins an opening, and they became even more unscrupulous. Zhao Jin and Wen Fei came from a military family, so in the face of such a situation, they did not panic and showed a rare calmness. Zhao Jin said, "Fei, take the other sisters and leave first. I will go look for Wan Mimi and Ing." When Fei hesitated, "Can you do it alone?" "It's all right, I will be careful." Zhao Jin settled the sisters down and picked up the flexible sword that had fallen from a slain assassin. Coincidentally, she saw Dong Yinger being forced into a corner, and the flexible sword in the assassin's hand was about to pierce Dong Yinger's chest. Anxious, Zhao Jin threw the flexible sword towards the assassin's back. She threw it with great force, and the assassin could not dodge in time. He was suddenly stabbed, and the sword in his hand slid down powerlessly. Dong Yinger had long been frightened to the point of tears. At this moment, seeing Zhao Jin was like seeing her savior, Jin. Zhao Jin hurriedly ran over to help her up. "Are you all right?" Dong Yinger looked behind her, and her eyes widened in fear. Zhao Jin felt that something was wrong, and when she turned around, she saw a fierce face. "Go to hell." Immediately after, a silver light flashed, and Zhao Jin closed her eyes in despair. Unexpectedly, she felt her body lighten, and heard the sound of something heavy falling to the ground. She opened her eyes in shock, and saw a young man carrying both her and Dong Yinger in one hand. With a long sword in his hand, he danced extremely well. Zhao Jin was born in a military family, and had looked down on her elder brothers and father practicing swordsmanship. However, she had never seen anyone who danced with a sword so beautifully. His facial features were not as rough as those of her father and brother, but had the elegance and handsomeness of a scholar. However, within that handsomeness, there was also a trace of determination and courage. Dong Ying'er was also stunned, and a captivating blush suddenly appeared on her cheeks. Jiang Xing rescued the two of them and placed them in a corner. "Stay here, don't move." After saying this, he did not look back and joined the battle. Dong Ying'er asked softly, "Who is he?" Zhao Jin shook her head, "I don't know." Looking at the back of that tall figure disappearing from the palace hall, she unexpectedly felt a little nervous and worried for this stranger. Not to mention the situation on this side, Jiang Ruan had covered herself extremely well when she arrived at this moment. Although the emperor had moved, the empress was still here. There were many imperial bodyguards by the empress side, so there was no need to worry. When Jiang Ruan turned her head, she saw a few assassins pushing Empress Dowager Ida into a corner. She did not know why, but they all seemed to want to deal with Empress Dowager Ida. Xianli had just settled Imperial Consort Chen down, and when he saw this scene, he was stunned and was about to run over. Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows, and without saying anything, when the assassin in the middle was about to stab Empress Dowager Ida's chest, she exclaimed, "Empress Dowager." Her movements were faster than her voice, and she suddenly rushed over, pushing Empress Dowager Ida to the side, and straightened her body to meet the tip of the sword. She turned her head and smiled coldly at the astonished Xianli. "Look, the show has just begun." Chapter 102. Jiang Ruan straightened her body to meet the tip of the sword. Her actions were so decisive that even Xianli was stunned. The assassin did not expect a strange young girl to appear out of nowhere. His eyes narrowed and he did not show any mercy. The flexible sword in his hand went straight for Jiang Ruan's chest. At this critical moment, a dagger flew out from the side and knocked the flexible sword slightly off course. The sword's aura was obstructed and it did not pierce Jiang Ruan's chest. However, the sword's aura still managed to scratch Jiang Ruan's shoulder and chest. Blood immediately dyed her clothes red. Jiang Ruan was pushed back by the sword energy and suddenly found that her body was light. Her body had fallen into a wide and cold embrace. The young man's breath blew into her ear, bringing with it the pleasant scent of green bamboo. Xiao Xiao protected her in his arms and conveniently snatched the flexible sword from the assassin's hand to block in front of him. He said to the shocked Empress Dowager Ida, "This place is not suitable to stay for long. Empress Dowager, please leave first." Jin 1 and Jin 2 suddenly appeared in front of Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao handed Jiang Ruan over to Jin 1 and 2 secret guards protected Jiang Ruan and Empress Dowager Ida as they left. Everything that had happened just now fell into Xian Li's eyes. He originally wanted to save the Empress Dowager but was startled by Jiang Ruan's sudden rush out. Seeing that she was injured, Xiao Xiao saved her and left. His heart could not calm down for a long time. It was as if there was a voice in his heart reminding him that it was not like this. It should not have been like this. Everything that happened tonight was so strange that Xianli could not figure out where the strange feeling in his heart came from. And what did the smile that Jiang Ruan showed him when she met the tip of the sword? It seemed to contain an infinite meaning that made one's heart palpitate, but it was impossible to fathom. Xianli was not the only one who saw all this. There was another person in the hall. It was Princess He. When the chaos happened, the guards around her were protecting her, so she was not entangled by the assassin. She wanted to search for the figure of that person in the hall, but when she looked up, she saw Xiao Xiao protecting Jiang Ruan in his arms. Immediately, her beautiful little face became somewhat distorted. What kind of person was Xiao Xiao? His temperament was extremely cold. Normally, he did not get close to people, let alone strange women. No matter what, Jiang Ruan was just a female official. There were so many injured female officials here, yet Xiao Xiao had saved Jiang Ruan. Moreover, he had clearly seen the nervousness in Xiao Xiao's eyes just now. He was truly worried about Jiang Ruan. He's small face was deathly pale, and she bit her lower lip. Xiao Xiao was just a beautiful and aloof youth, and she had fallen in love with him the first time she saw him. Unfortunately, no matter how he expressed it, Xiao Xiao remained unmoved like a stone man. Today, Jiang Ruan's appearance was too splendid, and she had also gained the favor of Empress Dowager Ida, which had already made her unhappy. At this moment, seeing Xiao Xiao so protective of her, her heart was driven mad with jealousy. She could not wait for Jiang Ruan to immediately die under a flurry of blades. The guards outside the palace all rushed in, and most of the assassins were also taken care of. After all of them were subdued, Xiao Xiao put away his dagger and coldly said, "Leave them alive and find out who the master is." The hall was a mess of cups and plates, and the cries of the wounded were endless. There were also the cries of innocent family members who had died a violent death. No one had expected that such a sudden change would occur today. A palace banquet had suddenly become a slaughterhouse. People from the palace came to help clean up the corpses, and the nearest imperial physician hurried over to treat the patients. Guan Lianghan breathed a sigh of relief and patted Jiang Xing's shoulder, saying, "Brat, you adapted well today. You didn't panic in the face of danger, and you somewhat resembled this general in the past." However, Jiang Xing's mind was completely elsewhere. He frowned as he looked at the hall, but he did not see Jiang Ruan's figure. His heart was burning with anxiety. After thinking for a while, he walked up to Xiao Xiao and said, "Xiao Wanya, have you seen my younger sister?" Jiang Ruan was escorted by secret guards all the way back to the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful with Empress Dowager Ida. Although the knife wound was not deep, it was very long. Due to the excessive loss of blood, her originally snow-white face now had no trace of color, and her rosy lips had become extremely transparent. When Empress Dowager Ida saw her appearance, she anxiously ordered someone to summon the best imperial physician in the palace, and ordered a palace maid to help Jiang Ruan onto her own bed. In the end, Jiang Ruan had not lost consciousness. When she saw this in a daze, she tried to open her eyes and get down. With great effort, she said, "Your Highness, Empress Dowager, this official's daughter's status is lowly, this matter is urgent." Empress Dowager Ida quickly said, "You have done a meritorious deed by saving Aijia, so Aijia will let you sleep on my bed." Jiang Ruan still wanted to speak, but her complexion became increasingly pale. Her voice was hoarse, and she seemed to be extremely exhausted. She slightly turned her face to the side, and she did not even have the strength to speak. When Empress Dowager Ida saw this, her face sank, and she angrily said, "Why is the imperial physician not here yet? If he doesn't come, Aijia will chop off his head." When the gu beside Empress Dowager Ida saw this, she was also surprised. Empress Dowager Ida's temperament had been very cold these years, but today, for this unfamiliar young girl, she repeatedly showed abnormal emotions. It was really somewhat strange. The highly respected imperial physician in the palace quickly rushed over. When he heard that it was Empress Dowager Ida's imperial decree, he was still very puzzled, but when he saw the unfamiliar young girl lying on the Empress Dowager's bed, he became even more suspicious. This young girl was very unfamiliar, and she was not related to Princess Yi, so why was Empress Dowager Ida so nervous? Could it be that she had a close relationship with Empress Dowager Ida? Although he was puzzled, the imperial physician did not say much. He only took Jiang Ruan's pulse before he got up and said, "This young lady has just lost too much blood. Although she has been wounded, fortunately, the wound is not deep. If it had been deeper, or a little more to the side, I'm afraid it would have been dangerous." Empress Dowager Ida breathed a sigh of relief, and the imperial physician said again, "I will write 2 prescriptions, feed this young lady the medicine, and bandage her wound. For the next few days, pay attention to avoid food, otherwise, it will not be conducive to the recovery of the wound." According to the imperial physician, will there be a scar in the future? Empress Dowager Ida frowned. The knife wound was from the shoulder to the chest. After all, she was an unmarried daughter. If there was a scar, it would more or less affect her marriage in the future. Jiang Ruan's skin was as white as snow, and for a scar to appear out of nowhere, it was a pity. In addition, her behavior today was similar to that of Princess Yuanrong, so Empress Dowager Ida's question was somewhat sincere. The imperial physician wiped the sweat from his forehead, replying to Empress Dowager, "If she recuperates well, perhaps there will not be a scar." This meant that there might still be a scar. Empress Dowager Ida's eyes darkened, and her tone suddenly became sharp. "I understand. Go out and bring someone to get the medicine." Only then did the imperial physician carry his medicine box and leave the hall with the palace maids. Empress Dowager Ida looked at Jiang Yuan. Jiang Yuan was lying on the bed, her beautiful eyes slightly closed, and her lips were as pale as her skin. It seemed that she was trying her best to endure the pain, but she did not frown. Instead, she still looked at her with a smile, as if she was comforting her. Compared to her calm charm in the main hall, at this moment, she had taken off her outer clothes and appeared young and immature, with an even more delicate and pitiful style. In particular, the smile on her lips was so sensible that it made one's heart ache. Empress Dowager Ida suddenly thought of Princess Yuanrong. In her previous life, after entering the palace, Jiang Yuan had learned of this matter from the idle chatter of the people in the palace. At that time, she had been very worried about Xian Li's description of the scene. Now that she thought about it, there was no lack of doubtful points. As for blocking the sword for Empress Dowager Ida, that was nothing more than a joke. If Xian Li was really a loyal and affectionate person like the rumors said, he would not have personally killed his own imperial father. Everyone thought that Xian Li would not have been so ruthless towards her. In fact, Jiang Yuan knew better than anyone that Xian Li was a person who kept a low profile and was especially ruthless towards her. In this life, she had ruined his plan. Empress Dowager Ida must be saved, but the one who saved her might not be Xian Li. Just now, Jiang Yuan had staked everything on one throw. Today, she had been thinking of deliberately pretending to look like Princess Yuanrong, and then thinking of a way to save Empress Dowager Ida's life. Since she had performed a meritorious deed in saving the emperor, the palace would certainly reward her, although she didn't know what it would be. However, it was enough to deter the 8th prince and the Xia clan from acting rashly for the time being. It was not until she entered the palace that she found out that Xian Li planned to marry her. This was something she did not expect and had never happened in her previous life. Now that she had saved the Empress Dowager, the Empress Dowager's feelings towards her would inevitably rise to another level. At this time, even if Imperial Consort Chen still wanted to use some method to force the Empress Dowager to relent, the Emperor's bestowal of marriage would be impossible. As long as she showed a trace of unwillingness, Empress Dowager Ida would not agree to the marriage. Because now, Empress Dowager Ida must have already regarded her as half a Princess Yuanrong. Moreover, she had done a meritorious deed in saving the emperor. Henceforth, Imperial Consort Chen couldn't say that this was a good thing for her. However, this was not a matter of absolute profit. Thinking about the danger just now, there was still some lingering fear in her heart. Although she had cut off all means of retreat, she had not expected that the assassin's sword would be so menacing. It was no wonder that Xian Li had been seriously injured in her previous life. Today, if Xiao Xiao had not used his dagger to deflect the assassin's soft sword, she would not have been as relaxed as she was now. She was not afraid of death, but she could not die before her revenge was complete. She owed him a favor. Jiang Yuan slowly closed her eyes. In short, today's situation was much better than she had expected. When Jiang Xinji and the Zhao family received the news that Jiang Yuan had been sent to the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful for treatment, they were stunned for a moment. Empress Dowager Ida was usually condescending, and today was only the first time she had seen Jiang Yuan. Now that she had personally asked her to stay in the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful, it showed that in her heart, Jiang Yuan was not simply the daughter of an ordinary official. Jiang Quan and Xia Yan were waiting outside. In her heart, Jiang Su could not wait to hear the news of Jiang Ruan's death, but when she heard that Empress Dowager Ida had summoned an imperial physician to treat Jiang Ruan, this honor could be seen at a glance. She could not help but clench her hands into fists, and a trace of resentment flashed in her eyes. Jiang Quan's expression was complicated. Today, Jiang Yuan had done a meritorious service in rescuing the emperor, and this credit would eventually be given to the Jiang Fu. Unfortunately, it was Jiang Yuan. In recent days, Jiang Yuan had repeatedly shone with extraordinary splendor, unexpectedly overshadowing Jiang Su's brilliance. In his heart, he did not regard Jiang Yuan as his own flesh and blood. Jiang Yuan was indeed outstanding, and the more she blocked Jiang Su's path, the more dissatisfied he became. Now that Jiang Yuan had done this, it was inevitable that she would be a head above Jiang Su. He wholeheartedly wanted to pave the way for Jiang Su, and Jiang Yuan's way of doing things was really intolerable. As he thought this, there was not the slightest trace of worry on Jiang Quan's face. There was only calmness and a trace of disgust. He only said to the young eunuch who had come to report, "This official sincerely thanks the Empress Dowager for her good intentions, but my daughter is impulsive and cannot bear this kindness. I would like to trouble eunuch to return and report to the Empress Dowager to allow this official to bring my daughter back to the Fu." When Xia Yan heard Jiang Quan's words, a trace of pride flashed in her eyes. At first, the young eunuch was also astonished. It was true that his daughter was injured. If it was an ordinary father, he would at least ask about the injury. Yet, this person had opened his mouth and wanted to bring her back. The young eunuch was also a shrewd person who had gone through many trials and tribulations in the palace. With one glance, he could tell that there was only disgust and no warmth in Jiang Quan's eyes. Thinking of Empress Dowager Yi's special treatment of eldest Jiang Miss, the young eunuch waved his horsetail whisk and said, "This Zajia does not dare to accept this. Eldest Jiang Miss is treated by an imperial physician in the palace. Even if she were to be brought back to the Jiang Fu, I'm afraid she would not be able to find such a brilliant physician. Moreover, this is the Empress Dowager's imperial decree. This Zajia is only a servant who conveys the message. If Jiang Darren has anything to say, it would be better for him to personally go to the Empress Dowager and say it." This kind of savage attitude, whether intentionally or unintentionally, was a form of suppression. Unfortunately, the servants in the palace could not be offended. In the palace, Jiang Quan had always been known as a noble and virtuous person. How could he be ridiculed like this? Immediately, his face flushed red and he could not say a word. The young eunuch looked at Xia Yan contemptuously and snorted disdainfully in his heart. He really did not know how these two people in the Jiang family had given birth to such a penetrating young miss like Jiang Ruan. Jiang Xing could not see Jiang Ruan's injury with his own eyes. Although he knew that there was an imperial physician treating her, his heart was still anxious and fearful. He did not know why Jiang Ruan would block the sword for Empress Dowager Yi, and he somewhat blamed her in his heart. Although it was disgraceful, even if the emperor's life was hanging by a thread, he still did not want Jiang Ruan to take this risk. The young eunuch was about to leave after replying, but just as he reached the door, he bumped into Xiao Xiao. He hurriedly bowed to Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao waved his hand, took out a small blue porcelain bottle from his bosom, and threw it at him. He simply said, "Jade facial ointment." Jade facial ointment was a good thing that even the imperial concubines in the palace rarely had access to. This small bottle was worth 1,000 taels of gold, and it could remove scars on a woman's body. Although Xiao Xiao did not say for whom, the young eunuch understood that the target should be Jiang Yuan, who was lying in the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. Although he was suspicious of the relationship between Xiao Xiao and Jiang Yuan, he still smiled fawningly and said, "Rest assured, Your Highness, Zajia will definitely bring it." Xiao Xiao glanced at him indifferently, turned around, and left the palace hall. That night in the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful, Jiang Yuan slept surprisingly well. When she woke up, two beautiful palace maids were busily helping her change her clothes. Jiang Yuan moved her body, and surprisingly, the wound on her chest did not hurt. One of the palace maids smiled and said, "Miss has woken up. The wound is not deep, it will be fine after a good bandage." She then explained in a low voice, "Previously, the imperial physician wanted to leave a scar. Fortunately, Xiao Wangye sent the jade facial ointment, so there is no need to worry, there will not be a scar left." There was a trace of envy in her tone. Jiang Yuan looked at her appearance and was startled. Xiao Xiao sent the jade facial ointment. She pressed the center of her forehead. The favor she owed him was getting bigger and bigger. Since her rebirth, when she used people, she would certainly give them an equivalent reward. For example, supporting Lu Min was also for the sake of being useful in the future. Asking Gu Yi for help was also to take advantage of Gu Yi's love for beauty. Yet, Xiao Xiao had helped her time and time again. Even if it was to repay a debt of gratitude, what he was giving now was likely to have already been repaid in full. Xiao Xiao had helped her so frankly, but she did not know how to repay him. After thinking for a while, she simply put this matter aside. She asked the palace maid, who was injured last night. The palace maid reported a long list of names. Hearing this, Jiang Ruan breathed a sigh of relief. She did not recognize anyone. If she had to say who was injured, it would be that Jiang Dan had fallen into the arms of the current court Zhuo Langzhong in a panic last night. Zhuo Langzhong was young and promising, but in the chaos last night, Jiang Dan's clothes had been torn. At that time, Zhuo Langzhong saw that Jiang Dan was a delicate and weak girl, and her crying made his heart soften. Thus, he promised to take responsibility for her after this incident. The palace maid said, "I'm afraid that fourth Mrs. Wedding will also be decided soon." Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows. This seemingly weak and timid fourth sister made her have a whole new level of respect for her. In such a chaotic situation last night, it was hard for her to still have the mind to think about this. If she was not careful, she would lose her life, yet she still dared to do so. However, Jiang Dan's luck was good. She had won the gamble, hadn't she? Seeing that Jiang Ruan was lost in thought, the palace maid said, "Deputy General Jiang saw you, then left in a hurry due to some matters. The Empress Dowager should be back soon." When Miss was unconscious, the Deputy General and the Empress Dowager were very worried. Jiang Ruan thought for a while, what about my father, mother, and younger sister? The Empress Dowager has already ordered them to return to the Fu. The palace maid replied. Jiang Ruan lowered her eyes. The Empress Dowager had ordered Jiang Quan and the others to return to the palace. Didn't that mean that she already disliked Jiang Quan? Looking at it this way, it was very good. She smiled slightly and looked at the palace maid apologetically, "I'm a little hungry. The meal has already been laid out. This servant will serve Miss your meal now." The palace maid smiled. In the imperial study, the emperor fiercely smashed the paperweight on the table onto the floor. So, it was the people of Tianjin last night? Guan Lianghan and Xiao Xiao tacitly agreed. Tianjin was located to the north of the Great Jin dynasty. Its territory was not vast, but because it was near the sea, its business across the sea was excellent. It had always maintained a non-aggression relationship with the Great Jin dynasty. It wasn't that the Jin dynasty had never thought of annexing Tianjin, but although Tianjin's territory was small, its steel smelting was outstanding, and the weapons its soldiers wore were of much better quality than those of the Great Jin dynasty. The late emperor had once tried to attack Tianjin, but Tianjin had resisted the Jin dynasty's 400,000 troops. The war dragged on for a whole year until the Jin dynasty was short of troops and the common people had no way of making a living because of the excessive taxes. The late emperor realized that this was a lose-lose situation and ordered the withdrawal of his troops. From then on, they only guarded against invasions and lived in harmony. However, last night, Xiao Xiao and Guan Lianghan had interrogated them overnight. Although these suicide soldiers had been very firm, their words had revealed that something was wrong. Xiao Xiao had ordered the brocade guards to investigate, and they had discovered that these assassins were all people of Tianjin. A tiny place like this dares to be so impudent. The emperor was furious. Last night, the assassins' every move had been aimed at the emperor, but in the end, they had carried out a massacre in the palace hall, causing panic among the officials. Disrupting the court like this was a provocation. What did Tianjin mean? Did they want to declare war on the Jin dynasty? Tianjin has been stirring up trouble at the border for the past few years. Xiao Xiao reminded him, this assassination could very well be a signal. A signal to declare war? Guan Lianghan asked. Do you think I'm afraid of them? No emperor could tolerate such an impudent provocation. The dignity of an emperor could not be trampled on, not to mention this was a matter of national security. He frowned. General Guan, are you willing to lead the troops to attack Tianjin? Guan Lianghan smiled, I'd be delighted. He had never wanted to stay in this nuisance of the capital, facing these genteel people every day. This year, after winning the war and returning to the capital, the emperor had told him to stay in the capital for the rest of his life. He was already very unhappy. Soldiers were born for the battlefield, especially Guan Lianghan. Only on the battlefield could he display his full potential. The emperor thought for a moment, take your deputy general with you. If he is a natural-born general and returns victorious, I will reward him handsomely. Guan Lianghan's expression turned solemn. The emperor's words had really given Jiang Xing space to display his abilities. He had originally thought that since Jiang Xing had rejected Imperial Consort Chen's request, the emperor would more or less have a prejudice against him. Now that Jiang Xing and his sister had just reunited, he had given Jiang Xing another opportunity to go to war. If he shone brilliantly in this campaign, then the great Jin dynasty would have another young hero, and Jiang Xing would be able to truly establish a firm foothold in the court. It was just that he did not know whether that maniac who loved his sister would be willing to leave Jiang Yuan. The emperor continued, last night, there were so many assassins in the palace. Could it be that the guards were all dead? He looked at Xiao Xiao. Xiao, bring out your embroidered uniform guards. This meant that a great purge was about to be carried out. The assassins of Tianjin had entered the palace as if there was no one there. This meant that there was already a mole in the palace. Although the identity of the mole was not known, as long as the mole was not removed, it would be like a malignant tumor growing on the emperor's heart. Xiao Xiao nodded slightly, yes. Guan Lianghan sighed in his heart. In this palace, there was bound to be another reign of terror. After the two of them had finished discussing other matters with the emperor, they left the imperial study and saw a beautiful young girl standing outside. She was dressed in a golden muslin skirt, her clothing was gorgeous and exquisite. Her meticulously made-up face was extremely beautiful and had a faint exotic aura. She leisurely walked over and smiled at Xiao Xiao, Xiao Wangye. It was Princess He. Guan Lianghan winked at Xiao Xiao and left with large strides. Xiao Xiao looked down at He indifferently, his gaze unexpectedly without the slightest bit of warmth. Princess He's heart skipped a beat when she saw his cold gaze, and she unexpectedly felt a little timid. However, when she thought of last night's events, her gaze revealed traces of resentment. She raised her head and looked straight at Xiao Xiao's handsome and cold face. What relationship does Xiao Wangye have with eldest Jiang Miss? This question was baffling, and Xiao Xiao did not know what she meant. He frowned and coldly said, what does this have to do with Princess? Princess He's eyes reddened as she felt a chill run down her spine at his cold words. Aggrieved, she said, you clearly know that I like you. Princess, be careful with your words. Xiao Xiao's gaze suddenly turned cold. I, Xiao, have no other intentions towards Princess. What about Jiang Yuan? Princess He could not help but ask sharply, do you like her? Xiao Xiao's frown deepened, as if he could not understand her words. However, there were more important matters at hand, so he only glanced coldly at Princess He and turned to leave. In Princess He's eyes, this action was a tacit agreement. She was startled for a moment, then suddenly covered her face and burst into tears. After Jiang Yuan had her breakfast, Empress Dowager Ida returned to the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. Seeing her like this, she asked, is your body better? Jiang Yuan smiled. Replying to Empress Dowager, I am much better. Empress Dowager Ida looked her up and down and saw that her spirit was indeed much better than yesterday. Feeling relieved, she sat down on the soft couch. Next to her, her personal palace maid brought her a cup of tea. Empress Dowager Ida took the tea and took a sip, quietly sizing Jiang Yuan up. The young girl in front of her was obedient and clean. Although her appearance was charming, her eyes were clear and free of impurities. The rarest thing was her unperturbed composure, which made her beauty lose its frivolity and become steady and noble. She asked in a seemingly careless manner, "Did Jiang Quan not treat you well?" Jiang Ruan seemed to be taken aback by this question. After thinking for a moment, she smiled and said, "Not really. It's just that this official's daughter was raised in the rural residence. Since childhood, I have not been very close to father." She did not complain, nor did she lie and say that Jiang Quan treated her very well. What she stated was the truth, but her words were to absolve Jiang Quan. What she said was very appropriate. Empress Dowager Ida's lips curled into a faint smile. "Since you are not close, then presumably you will not be sad to part." This time, Jiang Ruan was really stunned and looked at her doubtfully. Empress Dowager Ida looked at the ruby on her armor and said, "Jiang family's girl, Aijia is going to the Imperial Ancestral Temple next to the Imperial Mausoleum to stay for 3 years. Are you willing to go with me?" Chapter 103. Jiang Xing was taken aback. He looked towards the source of the voice and saw a beautiful and delicate young girl with 2 maids behind her. Judging from her attire, she should be a young lady from a wealthy family. He found it familiar, and for a moment, he was puzzled. When the girl saw that Jiang Xing didn't seem to remember her, a trace of disappointment flashed in her eyes. A moment later, he smiled and said, "My father is the capital governor, and he wants to invite you to his residence to express his gratitude." Guan Lianghan looked at him with understanding. "You must be reluctant to part with that sister of yours." "Brother and sister, what do you mean by always valuing your younger sister more than your own daughter? Besides, to be honest, that sister of yours is not someone who will easily suffer a loss. I'm afraid that others have not been schemed against by her." However, Jiang Su was not as agitated as she usually was. Her pale face was very calm. "Mother, I have already decided. I want to go to the family temple. I've already begged father, and he agreed." "How did you know?" Lian Xiao was surprised and continued, "That's right. I heard that Second Inyang said something to Master and Master changed his mind. Originally, he wanted to send 4th Mrs. Gung invitation, but now he decided to send 3rd Miss instead." Jiang Xing stood rooted to the ground, his mind a mess. He naturally knew that this was an excellent opportunity. The battlefield was originally a place to display one's fists and feet. If he lost, he would just die on the battlefield, but if he won, he would gain glory and splendor. He was not afraid of death, nor did he pursue glory, splendor, wealth and rank. However, if he wanted Jiang Ruan to receive better protection, then he could only climb higher step by step. "Is Sua Langzhong willing to do this?" Jiang Ruan leaned against the soft cushion of the carriage seat as she sipped her tea unhurriedly. "I just can't accept it." Jiang Dan's voice was hoarse. "I worked so hard, but in exchange, I ended up like this. Jiang Li snatched my marriage, Jiang Su's father protected her, and even Jiang Ruan, whom I originally thought might not be much better off than me, is now enjoying limitless glory. What have I gained?" In a flash, her gaze turned cold, and she said in a low voice, "I am just unreconciled. One day, I will live a better life than all of them. I will make them all look up to me." With this in mind, he was determined to attack the Tianjin nation. However, when he thought that Jiang Ruan would have to live alone in the Jiangfu for 3 years, he felt his heart wrench. Empress Dowager Ida's reward could be said to be generous. Even if she was bent on revenge, she couldn't help but be tempted. 3 years was enough for many things to happen. Xia Yan might be able to regain her power, but by staying by Empress Dowager Ida's side, she could also make it so that Empress Dowager Ida could not leave her side. At this time, Jiang Xing was talking to Jiang Ruan at Ruanju. Naturally, Jiang Ruan knew that he was about to set off on an expedition to Tianjin. In his previous life, the war between the Tianjin kingdom and the Great Jin dynasty had lasted for 5 years. However, Jiang Xing was no longer around in his previous life. Now that the same thing had happened, she naturally knew that the Great Jin dynasty had won this battle, but it had been a Pyrrhic victory. The kingdom of Tianjin had produced an extremely powerful military advisor. Together with this treacherous weapon, they had almost caused the Great Jin dynasty to suffer a loss. Lian Xiao said, after returning that night, Master and Madam went to the study room. I don't know what they said, but second young miss was shocked. They found a doctor and gave her a prescription to calm her nerves before going to sleep. When second young master heard the news that eldest young master had received a reward, he was very angry and went out to drink. There was a hint of ridicule in her tone. The next day, he was carried back drunk. Jiang Yuan smiled as she looked at the professional Empress Dowager Ida, but her heart was in turmoil. Bai Ji also sighed, fourth young miss is really too pitiful. Zhuolangzhong does not know about this matter. According to second Yin Yang, as long as she marries and goes through the ceremony, Zhuolangzhong will be helpless. When the time comes, Master will personally talk to Zhuolangzhong, and the matter will be settled. Jiang Xing touched her head and did not speak. Jiang Xing calmly distanced himself from Guanliang Han. That is my family's matter, General does not need to worry about it. She motioned for Bai Ji and Lian Xiao to stay in the carriage, while she walked toward Xiao Xiao. When she was in front of Xiao Xiao, she said, Xiao Wangye. The general-in-chief who supports the state had devoted his life to the country and the people, and had not taken the initiative to make any requests. In front of all the civil and military officials, the emperor could not refuse such a simple request. Thus, he waved his hand, approved. Jiang Xing did not seem to notice that he had abandoned a woman's self-esteem. Dong Yinger murmured, does he hate me? Jiang Su's complexion had been pale for the past few days. Xian Li's words on the night of the palace banquet had pierced her heart. She was naturally unwilling that the person in the heart of such a handsome man was actually Jiang Yuan. At this moment, when he heard that Jiang Yuan was about to leave, he sneered, good, it's good that you leave. It's best if you die in the ancestral temple. The blood moon bracelet on Jiang Yuan's wrist emitted a faint blue light. When Xiao Xiao's gaze landed on her, Jiang Yuan immediately felt as if she had been pricked by a needle, and her long sleeves covered her wrist. She was vexed. Why was she so abnormal today? Presumably, it was because she was about to leave the capital, and this ally had helped her so many times, which was why it was strange. Jiang Yuan smiled, eldest brother does not need to worry about me, I have my own plans. She knew that Jiang Xing had gone on this expedition for her sake. If not for the fact that he wanted to better protect her, why would Jiang Xing need to live on the edge of a knife? Thinking about it, this gentle and refined young master of a scholarly family in her past life, the hand that had once held a brush was now holding a sword. The pure white robe had also been replaced with battle armor. When Lian Xiao and Bai Ji came to fetch Jiang Yuan back to the Fu, they were met with envious gazes. Bai Ji worriedly asked, Miss, are you injured anywhere? We were extremely worried, but we could not stay in the palace, so we do not know how you are. Jiang Yuan was stunned again. After leaving the Guanfu, Jiang Xing planned to return to the Jiangfu first and discuss this matter with Jiang Yuan. Just as he reached the entrance of the Guanfu, he heard a delicate and timid female voice say, Jiang Darren. It was a delicate and small dagger, inlaid with a high-quality emerald cat's eye stone. With one glance, it was obvious that it was not an ordinary item. Jiang Yuan had also seen it before. It was the dagger that Xiao Xiao had never left his side. She was stunned, Xiao Wangye, this is. Tonight, she had merely saved the eldest daughter of the Jiangfu, Empress Dowager Ida. Although the Empress Dowager was indebted to her, it was not considered much. After the reward, people would gradually forget about this matter. However, if she had followed the Empress Dowager for 3 years, everyone would have a whole new level of respect for her. When they saw Jiang Yuan, they would subconsciously think that she was someone close to the Empress Dowager. Jiang Yuan was going to follow the Empress Dowager to the family temple. Naturally, there was more than one person in the Jiangfu who was jealous. Jiang Li did not need to be mentioned. Although she had obtained the marriage of the Zhuolangjong, when she thought of Jiang Ruan's relationship with the imperial family, she was extremely jealous. In Jiang Dan's courtyard, Jiang Dan was sickly lying on the bed. Jiang Ruan was astonished. This person was very strange. He even mentioned parting. The dagger in her hand seemed to weigh heavily on her heart. Jiang Ruan shook her head. This thing is of great significance to Xiao Wanye. Forgive me for not being able to accept it. Xiao Xiao explained, this dagger is your birthday present. Finished speaking, he said, something the Xiao has given out, there is no reason for me to take it back. Finished speaking, he stared fixedly at the dagger, as if he would rather die than take it back. Jiang Ruan looked into the distance, soon. Jiang Ruan tilted her head and saw the corner of a black robe through the gap in the curtain. She thought for a moment, then said to the coachman, let the coachman leave first. Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows and waited for her to continue. Sure enough, Lian Xiao said, after third miss found out about this, she did not say anything and went to find second Yang. Second Yang went to find master. Later, master called fourth miss into the study and talked for a while. When fourth miss came out, her face was pale. Later, Lu Zhu went to inquire about it. What do you think miss found out? What you gain, you will lose. Jiang Xing had just entered the imperial court, and his foundation was not yet stable. If he could obtain the Empress Dowager's support, are you muddle-headed? Xia Yan was shocked, why go to the family temple? Do you know that if you go to the family temple, your life will be ruined? The carriage rumbled along and suddenly stopped. Lian Xiao was startled and subconsciously lifted the curtain, what's going on? Jiang Xing had actually made up his mind, but he was still worried about Jiang Ruan. Who knew that as soon as he returned to the Fu, he would hear that Empress Dowager Ida wanted to take Jiang Ruan away. His heart was immediately relieved. Following Empress Dowager Ida was much safer than staying in the Jiangfu. But he was also suspicious and said, I don't know why the Empress Dowager is looking for you, but accompanying a ruler is like accompanying a tiger, the Empress Dowager is the same. Ruan, you have to act according to the circumstances. Don't let yourself suffer losses. Strange things happened one after another. It was said that on the second day, the Defender General who supports the nation, Zhao Guang, personally presented a memorial to the imperial court, stating that Jiang Ruan was the flesh and blood of the Zhao family. At that time, the Zhao family had ruthlessly severed all ties with Zhao Mei, and now, they did not ask for anything else. She only begged the emperor to grant her a grace, so that in the future, Jiang Ruan's marriage could be decided by herself. Let's wait and see. We'll see in a few years. Thank you, Prince Xiao. She said. The Jiang family's eldest daughter, Jiang Ruan, had used her own body to block a sword on the day of the palace banquet to save the Empress Dowager's life. This news had spread throughout the entire capital that very night. Everyone knew that Empress Dowager Ida, who had always been cold and solemn, had personally brought Jiang Ruan back to the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful to summon an imperial physician to treat her. Everyone said that the eldest daughter of the Jiang family had profited from misfortune. Not to mention the daughter of an official, even Empress Dowager Ida's own granddaughter did not receive such treatment. Everyone was saying that Jiang Ruan must have won Empress Dowager Ida's favor. This eldest daughter of the Jiang family, who had never been favored, had now run into some kind of good luck. In the carriage, Jiang Ruan was lost in thought. In her past life, 3 years later, what would she look like? Such a person, Unexpectedly, her cheeks were somewhat hot from being stared at by those starry eyes. Then, she came back to her senses and secretly scolded herself. Now, she was just a little girl. In Xiao Xiao's eyes, she could not even be considered a woman, so what was there for her to be shy about? She raised her head and looked at Empress Dowager Ida. Slowly, she smiled. Many thanks to Empress Dowager for your grace. This official's daughter is extremely honored. In the Jiangfu, there was a huge upheaval. Jiang Ruan nodded. What about fourth younger sister? As for Great Master Huiju's share, that was only to ensure that some things would be carried out as usual during the 3 years that she would not be in the capital. She looked at Xia Yan. Mother, I want to go to the family temple. Miss is such a good person, how could Deputy General Jiang dislike you? The maidservant beside her consoled her. There must really be something important. Miss, don't be sad. This unconsciously revealed smile was refined and handsome, and it immediately made Dong Yinger's face burn. Jiang Xing politely said, it was only a slight effort, Miss need not take it to heart. This humble one still has some matters to attend to, so I will leave first. Jiang Xing, however, smiled. Now that he had entered the court, he saw that there was a trend of climbing up the ranks. Many court officials were getting restless. After observing for a short time yesterday, it was likely that some of them had also been tempted. Was this the intention to rope him in? Although Jiang Xing was a military general, he was born into a family of civil officials. He was not completely ignorant about forming cliques in the court, and he also understood the principle of playing it safe. Now that his foundation was not stable, and the fight for the throne between the princes was very fierce, he naturally would not be foolish enough to get involved. Empress Dowager Ida smiled with satisfaction and spat out 2 words from her red lips. Very good. Xiao Xiao looked down at her, thought for a moment, and asked, you want to follow the Empress Dowager to the ancestral shrine? She exchanged a few more words with Xiao Xiao, then hurriedly boarded the carriage. The carriage rumbled as it headed out of the alley. The black-clothed youth stood motionless in the middle of the alley, his graceful bones free and elegant among the green pines. He calmly watched the carriage go into the distance, then turned to leave. A birthday gift, Xiao Xiao said. Su Su, what happened? Xia Yan was alarmed. Jiang Su Su's appearance made her even more worried. 4th Miss. Lian Qiao said mysteriously, that Zhuolangzhong's people came a few times. They seem to be good people, and they insist on being responsible for 4th Mississippi. They said that they will come to marry you in a few days, but, the horses neighed, and the morning sun sprayed out, dyeing half of the sky of the great Jin dynasty red. Clouds shone brightly in the sky, casting their light on the elite troops with high morale. The carriage rose, and a warm and gentle expression watched the procession go into the distance. Empress Dowager Ida said lightly, Aijia knows that you are a clever child. Think carefully, and follow Aijia. Aijia will ensure your safety. After 3 years, when you return to the palace, your status will not be ordinary. She looked at the ruby on her armor, you saved Aijia's life. After thinking about it, Aijia can only be happy with this reward. Baiji was puzzled, why does Miss say this? Xiao Xiao's beautiful eyes flashed with emotion. He pursed his lips, took out something from his bosom, and handed it to Jiang Ruan. Jiang Xing's gaze was reluctant to part. Jiang Ruan quietly stuffed the paper in her hand into Jiang Xing's waist. Jiang Xing was stunned. Jiang Ruan smiled and said in a low voice, one of them is for eldest brother, and the other is for Great Master Huiju in the capital. Eldest brother, take care. I am not sad. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Outside, it seemed that the fluttering corner of Jiang Xing's robe could still be seen. When she turned to go to the unfamiliar 3 years that had never existed in her past life, this young general would also step onto the battlefield, fight on the battlefield, and win his unique pride and dignity. 3 years was 3 years. The most painful thing in this world was not losing something before it was obtained, but to watch helplessly as it was held in one's hands, and then ruthlessly taken away. The higher one climbed, the harder they fell. She gave those people 3 years to climb to a height where they could fall to their deaths, and then after 3 years, their bodies would be smashed to pieces. Jiang Xing frowned slightly and remembered. Last night, he had indeed pulled this young girl up, but because he had saved too many people, and because of the chaos, he could not remember. Jiang Ruan laughed in her heart. Xiao Xiao was usually cold and cheerless, but how could he be so childish at this time? It really made one's jaw drop. The happiest person in the Jiang Fu was none other than the old Jiang madam. After all, Jiang Ruan's surname was Jiang, which meant that she was part of the Jiang family. No matter what other people thought, when Jiang Ruan was mentioned, they would know that she was a girl from the Jiang Fu. The emperor's care for Jiang Ruan was the emperor's care for the Jiang Fu. When she thought of this, she felt that Jiang Ruan and her sister were very amiable. Jiang Ruan nodded, yes. It is my good fortune to be able to travel with the Empress Dowager. She paused and looked at Xiao Xiao. On the day of the palace banquet, many thanks to Xiao Wanye for lending a helping hand. Jiang Ruan shook her head, wrong, Jiang Li will not be better off than Jiang Dan. What kind of person was Jiang Dan? Jiang Dan was not someone who would silently swallow grievances. If Jiang Quan thought that he could need Jiang Dan as he pleased, then he was gravely mistaken. It could not be denied that the matter of Jiang Li had already left a shadow of hatred in Jiang Dan's heart. That kind of venomous snake, lying in wait in the dark, would not hesitate to use its venom to kill all its enemies once it had the chance, leaving no leeway for others. Jiang Ruan did not think that Jiang Dan was pitiful. Since she had schemed against Zhuo Langzhong last night, she must have already had a plan. However, she had never thought that everything would be for the benefit of another person. As a concubine daughter, Jiang Li was naturally unwilling to accept that Jiang Dan would marry so well. Between Jiang Li and Jiang Dan, Jiang Quan would definitely side with Jiang Li. She did not know what second Yinyang had said to Jiang Quan, but it must have been for the sake of benefits that Jiang Quan had made this decision. That was what she had written down from memory the entire night. In her previous life, when she was in the palace, she had also heard some stories about the war between Tianjin and the Great Jin dynasty. There were some particularly thrilling battles that had been described in detail by those palace people. She searched for the information in her mind and wrote down all the battles that she could remember on a piece of paper for Jiang Xing. Whether or not Jiang Xing would suspect her, she no longer wanted to think about it. She only wanted to ensure Jiang Xing's safety. Now, she only wished that she could remember it more clearly. She was annoyed that she had not listened more in her previous life, so that Jiang Xing would have a higher chance of survival. Lian Xiao also said, "Third Miss has snatched Fourth Miss's marriage. Although it is not very kind, Zhuo Langzhong's family is very good. In the future, they will certainly live much better than Fourth Mississippi. Although Fourth Miss has received Master's consolation, I am afraid that she does not feel good in her heart." On the day that the Empress Dowager left the capital, there were 36 soft sedan chairs, 900 elite soldiers and guards, and 85 silk and jadeite carriages. The entire journey was grandiose and imposing. The emperor stood at the top of the palace walls and watched the procession go into the distance. After he finished speaking, he did not wait for Dong Yinger's reply and hurriedly rode away. Chapter 104. Xiao Xiao's words from 3 years ago would forever be a thorn in Princess He's heart. She originally wanted to find a way to harm Jiang Ruan, or at least make her wish she was dead. Who knew that with the Empress Dowager's edict, Jiang Ruan would withdraw and follow her to the Imperial Ancestral Temple, allowing her to escape. 10 days ago, when she heard that Jiang Ruan was returning to the capital, she was startled and thought of all the ways she could think of to harm her. Who knew that when she saw Jiang Ruan's appearance today, her heart would be in turmoil? I was just reminding fifth brother. Princess He smiled slightly. My imperial mother and imperial consort Nyang Nyang do not get along, so naturally, I would not sincerely want to help her. That would be my last resort. Isn't that why I'm looking for fifth brother? Fifth brother, you have to think clearly. That Hong and princess is a wonderful person. Fifth brother, you won't lose out. Jiang Chao was now working under Xian Li, managing the affairs of the shops in the capital. This task could not be considered big, but it was definitely not small either. In the past few years, Jiang Chao had worked hard and done a good job, earning Xian Li's appreciation. Jiang Quan, who was previously disappointed with Jiang Chao, had gradually changed his opinion of this son. Fifth Prince Xianhua's handsome face was gloomy. 10th sister, do you think that fifth brother is someone you can use? She was dressed in a bright red palace robe with flowing colors and dark flowers. She wore a cloud satin skirt with crabapple strands and golden butterflies. On the outside, she wore a light crimson lawn robe embroidered with wide sleeves of auspicious grass and wild geese. Her hair was combed into a hibiscus cloud bun, and her jet black hair was coiled behind her head, making her skin appear even whiter than snow. However, that ball of fiery red seemed to have splashed down from the heavens, landing on the rosy clouds of the great Jin dynasty. Her eyebrows were like spring water, her eyes like peach blossoms, and her lips were rosy like cherry blossoms. Her eyebrows and eyes were actually the depictions of beautiful women that had been painted for thousands of years. There was no air of immortality, but if one was not careful, they would fall into the graceful charm of this land. 8th Prince Xianli stared closely at the beautiful young woman approaching from afar. If 3 years ago, he had only wanted to control and use Jiang Yuan, now, besides being stunned, he was even more determined to win her. There were many beautiful women in this world, but there weren't many intelligent and beautiful women. However, someone as intelligent and beautiful as her was one of a kind in this world. Xian Li's heart was slightly moved. This woman was worthy enough to stand by his side. In the future, when he was the king, she would definitely be the empress. Are you threatening me? Jiang Yuan smiled faintly and looked at the chessboard under the apricot tree. Both the white and black pieces had been used up. It appeared to be a mess, but the predicament had already been set. The white pieces no longer had a way out, and the black pieces were full of murderous intent at every step. Everything was going well. Even though he hadn't been in the capital for 3 years, the chess game was still progressing at a steady pace. She walked to the front of the emperor and bowed, "Your son greets father." At this moment, there was a gust of wind. Everyone narrowed their eyes subconsciously. When he opened his eyes again, he saw a red-clothed figure walking over from afar in front of the 100-mile ceremonial procession and thousands of elite troops. In Xianhua's mind, Jiang Yuan's enchanting face that could topple cities suddenly appeared, and his breathing stagnated. That's right, he was a man. Seeing such a stunning beauty, it would be a lie if he said that he wasn't moved. Moreover, the support behind Jiang Yuan could not be underestimated. In the past 3 years, the struggle between him and Xianli for the throne had become more and more intense. On the surface, the more brotherly and respectful they appeared, the more they wished to kill each other in private. If he had Jiang Xing and the Zhao clan, wouldn't that be a bargaining chip? Moreover, Empress Dowager Ida had taken a liking to Hong and Junzhu. The 2 palace maids looked at Jiang Yuan calmly, as if they were certain that Jiang Yuan would not dare to refuse. In fact, in the palace, Princess He was domineering and the emperor doted on her. Therefore, everyone in the palace had to give Princess He face. Jiang Yuan had just returned to the capital, so she certainly did not dare to offend the princess. Everything had just begun. For the past 3 years, she had lived a peaceful life in the ancestral temple, listening to Zen and chanting scriptures every day. She was completely unaware of what was happening outside. In the eyes of Empress Dowager Ida, she was just like any other girl in the boudoir. However, Jiang Yuan knew that there had never been a day when the hatred had truly been removed from her heart. She knelt in front of the golden body of Buddha with a pious expression, but in her heart, she was cursing. She smiled amiably at the little monk who was sweeping the floor, but in her heart, she was thinking about how to destroy all those people step by step. Every night, she leaned against the headboard of the bed and the scenes from her previous life flashed before her eyes. The more furious she was, the gentler her expression became. Princess He smiled slightly. "If that's the case, many thanks to fifth brother." The journey back to the capital was about to begin. She wondered if those people were prepared to go to hell. Xianhua stared blankly for a moment, then said angrily, "What do you mean by this? Since you want to be my imperial consort, how can you ruin your reputation?" Hong and Princess, everyone was frightened and moved. Following closely behind the splendid carriage was a soft, crabapple-colored sedan chair. The sedan chair was equally magnificent and majestic, emitting a faintly discernible fragrance. Not knowing why, everyone unconsciously looked towards the sedan chair curiously, as if they were expecting someone to walk out. It just so happened that the weather was good. Spring had arrived earlier than usual, and the sun in the morning seemed to know that today was a big day. It was even brighter than the day before. Xianhua's eyes flashed slightly. What you said is very good, but this is too risky. She had also been waiting for this moment for a long time. Momo, it is not that I am willful. Xia Yan's eyes flashed with a trace of sadness. He only knows that today is the day that the Empress Dowager returns to the palace, but he does not know that today is also the day that Su returns to the Fu. Su has stayed in the ancestral temple for 3 years, and I have not seen her for 3 years. But you see, today he has not even asked a single question. Does he still have Su in his heart? That was a beauty that could not be found in the mortal world. However, she had already experienced this person's true colors. Jiang Yuan smiled faintly and turned her head away, unable to conceal the disgust in her eyes. Tomorrow, they would depart for the capital. Once they returned to the palace, everyone would know that this newly promoted princess of the great Jin dynasty would have a different status from the past. Thus, hard work paid off. 10 days ago, Empress Dowager Ida personally presided over her hairpin ceremony and sent a letter to the capital to request that she be conferred the title of princess. The emperor approved and bestowed the title of Hong and princess. If one were to say who Xia Yan was most worried about, it was still Jiang Su. She had never replied to the letters she had sent to Jiang Su, only sending a brief message saying that she was well. She was not even willing to see Xia Yan. Today, Jiang Su had returned to the capital after 3 years. Xia Yan was overjoyed, but she did not expect that Jiang Quan would pour cold water on her. So what if I don't go? Jiang Yuan looked down at them condescendingly. Under the gaze of that pair of charming and ice-cold eyes, the 2 palace maids only felt that the 2 of them were insignificant ants in Jiang Yuan's eyes, that even a glance was superfluous. Jiang Yuan said, "This princess and Princess He are of the same rank, and Princess He has no right to order this princess. You are just servants. I wonder if Master has taught you the etiquette of the palace, or do you think that this princess is easy to bully?" This kind of woman was worthy of the 4 words, demoness who brings calamity to the nation. Jiang Yuan nodded, a layer of pride slowly rising in her heart. 5th Prince Xianhua's eyes also brightened. Needless to say, the Crown Prince's eyes flashed with a trace of amazement. Even the mediocre 4th Prince Xian Lang could not help but reveal a trace of admiration at this moment. That person naturally referred to 5th Yinyang Hongying. In the past few years, Hongying's position in the Jiangfu had become more and more stable, almost to the point where she could compete with Xia Yan as an equal. Although senior servant Li said this, at this moment, Xia Yan was in a fit of anger, so how could she listen? She only angrily said, "Hey, you're just a prostitute from a brothel. What are you pretending to be virtuous and virtuous for? In the end, you still rely on seducing men." In the 11th year of Xuanda, Empress Dowager Ida returned to the capital. Even the emperor could not help but slightly narrow his eyes. Jiang Yuan looked at them with a smile and did not say a word. Unexpectedly, she did not look anxious at all. After waiting for a while, Jiang Yuan's posture did not change. One of the palace maids became somewhat impatient and said, "Is Miss Jiang trying to make things difficult for us servants?" Jiang Quan frowned slightly. "You do not need to do these trivial matters, just leave it to the servants." His gaze fell on Xia Yan's lower abdomen. "You should take care of your body." The eunuch dragged out his voice and said, "We respectfully welcome Hong and Princess back to the capital." She slowly caressed her lower abdomen. After just 3 months, the fetus seemed to be very stable. The doctor had come to take a look and said that it was very likely to be a boy. If it really was a boy, it meant that she would be able to gain the upper hand in the confrontation with Hong Ying. Xia Yan lowered her head to look at her slightly bulging belly and said, "My son, you must be safe." Xia Yan's brows suddenly flashed with a trace of joy. Speaking of which, these days, I have not arranged a tongfang for master. Lin Lang, who is by your side, is an obedient, impudent. Jiang Ruan's tone suddenly became solemn. Her expression no longer had that sweet smile of a moment ago. She coldly said, "Who gave you the courage to shout at this princess?" In the past few years, she had been raised by Empress Dowager Ida's side and had never deliberately inquired about outside news. The Jiang family had never sent any letters. Sometimes, when Empress Dowager Ida received news of the battlefield between Tianjin and the Great Jin dynasty, she would also call her over to listen. What was gratifying was that in the past 3 years, Jiang Xing had repeatedly turned the tide of battle and made extraordinary contributions. He had fought side by side with Guan Lianghan, and his bravery was not inferior to Guan Lianghan's. In addition, every time the enemy launched a surprise attack, he would always strike first and gain the upper hand. Thus, the title of the Great Jin dynasty's other god of war fell on Jiang Xing's shoulders. The splendid carriage stopped in front of the palace gates. Exquisitely dressed palace maids hurriedly stepped forward to lift the beaded curtains on the carriage. Empress Dowager Ida was dressed in a golden court dress, enameled with turquoise gold buttons, gorgeous and noble. She was supported as she walked out. She faintly glanced at the crowd. Just one glance was enough to make them feel an irresistible pressure. Princess He sneered, "She deserves to die." What kind of person was Xianhua? He had countless concubines in his fu. Just the tongfang alone filled the entire courtyard. Once Jiang Ruan entered the 5th prince's fu, that group of women would certainly not spare her. At that time, her reputation would be ruined, and Empress Dowager Ida would certainly not treat her as warmly as before. What the Great Jin dynasty despised the most were women who violated public morals and morals. In the future, it would be difficult for her to advance. Once Xianhua was tired of playing with Jiang Ruan, it would be easy for him to deal with her again. Jiang Ruan accompanied the Empress Dowager in the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful for a while before the Empress Dowager said that she was tired. She allowed Jiang Ruan to return to the Jiangfu and bring back some rewards. This was Empress Dowager Ida supporting her. Jiang Ruan smiled and thanked her before leaving the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. From afar, a young girl dressed as a maidservant trotted over. Her smile was sweet and adorable as she called out from afar, "Miss, Mississippi." Xianhua sneered, "10th sister, don't try to fool Gage. Speak, what is your purpose?" The 2 palace maids were startled, but before they could speak, they heard Jiang Ruan continue, "This Junju was personally requested by His Majesty, the Empress Dowager, and His Majesty bestowed this name. When the 2 of you see this Junju, you address this Junju as Miss Jiang. Could it be that, as palace maids, you still don't know this Junju's identity? Or, in your hearts, you only recognize Junju as your master, Princess He?" Jiang Ruan followed the palace maid who had led the way to the imperial garden. In front of her, 2 unfamiliar palace maids walked over. These 2 were dressed in extraordinary attire, so they were definitely not ordinary palace maids. When they saw Jiang Ruan, they bowed slightly and said, "Miss Jiang, Junju invites you over for a chat." Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, "It's been 3 years." Xia Yan slowly calmed down and sighed, "You're right, that lowly woman is just a chicken that can't lay eggs, there's nothing to fear. Now that Chao is slowly improving, in the future, he will be able to help the one in my belly a little." The palace maid who had led the way was also startled. Just now, she had been in a dilemma. Although Jiang Ruan was now rumored to be deeply favored by Empress Dowager Ida, Princess He had also been favored in the palace for so many years. If she were to offend Princess He because of Jiang Ruan, she would feel somewhat uneasy. Looking at Jiang Ruan's always smiling appearance, her intuition told her that this Hong and Junju was a soft persimmon. Unexpectedly, when Jiang Ruan spoke at this time, the palace maid suddenly realized that Jiang Ruan was not someone who could be easily bullied. Thus, she straightened her back and said, "That's right, my 2 elder sisters, when you see Junju, why don't you pay your respects to her?" Time flowed like water, fleeting. For the past 3 years, she had followed the Empress Dowager in the ancestral temple, eating vegetarian, chanting sutras, and walking in plain clothes. Every day, she accompanied the Empress Dowager by her side. Because she was extremely patient, she was not like ordinary young girls who would become impatient when they listened to the great master chanting sutras. For the past 3 years, bit by bit, she had infiltrated Empress Dowager Ida's life, quietly fawning over her. Slowly, Empress Dowager Ida accepted her. She was not Princess Yuanrong, but she also made Empress Dowager Ida feel like she was treating her own daughter. She slowly approached from afar, her fiery red skirt fluttering behind her. As she got closer, she discovered that this woman's makeup was exquisite and gorgeous. The corners of her eyes were finely sprinkled with gold powder, enshrouding her breathtaking beauty. The corners of her eyes were faintly raised, the corners of her lips curled into a smile, and her hands were folded in front of her. She was dignified and charming, cold and flirtatious. The two palace maids stared blankly, clenched their teeth, and greeted Jiang Ruan with the courtesy that servants used to greet a Junju. They said, "Just now, we were rash. But Hong and Junju, our Junju is still waiting for you. If you do this, isn't it a little? Why does fifth brother need to say this?" A smile blossomed on Heyi's beautiful face, but it was as glaring as a poisonous snake. Hong and Junju is not an ordinary person. If fifth brother can marry her, sooner or later, Jiang Xing will command one of the 3 armies. That old man Zhao Guang will also follow you, and with the Empress Dowager's support, won't fifth brother be tempted? Fifth brother, how can you be so naive? Princess Heyi sighed. Since younger sister has told fifth brother about this method, if fifth brother does not agree, younger sister will definitely tell eighth brother. If fifth brother is not willing, and eighth brother is willing, then Hong and Junju can only marry eighth brother. A demoness who brings calamity to the nation. Everyone's mind simultaneously floated up with the same thought. A slender jade-like hand stretched out. Xian Li stared blankly. The palace maid who had led the way was also in a difficult position. Presumably, Princess Heyi usually relied on Xu Fei to run amok in the palace. This palace maid was also very taboo. Jiang Yuan stood up, and from the corner of her eyes, she did not see Xiao Xiao's figure in the surroundings. Her heart was puzzled. According to common sense, with Xiao Xiao's status, he would definitely attend today. Now that she could not see any trace of Xiao Xiao anywhere, she could not help but think of the words Xiao Xiao had said before he left, "I want to make another trip to the Miao Stockade village." Since ancient times, the Miao Stockade village had been very dangerous. Could it be that some accident had occurred? Xianhua looked at Princess Heyi for a moment, and suddenly laughed. "It is said that the most poisonous thing is a woman's heart, but today is the first time I have seen 10th younger sister also have such a shrewd mind." Xianhua's expression changed, but he still said, "So what?" At that time, Hong and Princess rejected the marriage in front of the palace banquet. Now that Imperial Father has allowed her to choose her own husband, she will certainly not choose Lao Ba. "Rise," the Emperor said indifferently. Lu Zhu stuck out her tongue. Compared to the naive and unaffected little girl 3 years ago, she had now grown up a little and appeared more witty and likable. She slowed down her pace and walked to the side of the young girl in black. "This servant is too happy. Everything has been packed, and the Empress Dowager has already instructed that we will depart early tomorrow morning." Xian Li frowned, thought about it, and suddenly laughed again. No matter, even so, he still had the confidence to make Jiang Ruan give up her heart. How could the woman he fancied escape so easily? In the imperial garden, Princess Heyi's slender finger tapped on the cup in front of her. "Fifth brother, have you not thought about it?" The capital was bustling with activity that day, and there was no lack of people discussing this matter in the teahouses and restaurants. Empress Dowager Ida had left the capital 3 years ago and had only returned today. It was said that the emperor had brought all the civil and military officials to welcome her, and it was an unprecedented grand occasion. The common people could not see this grand occasion, but they still had to think about it in their hearts. It was as if they could see it with their own eyes. Princess He nestled next to concubine Shu. When she saw this young girl, a trace of hostility arose in her heart. She thought that in the capital of the great Jin dynasty, her appearance was already extremely beautiful. Who knew that when this young girl in red appeared, she was like the moonlight and fireflies? Her appearance was simply like a joke. When she heard the name of Hong and Princess, she immediately clenched her fists, and a trace of resentment flashed across her face. The Empress Dowager had already recognized her as an adopted daughter, which meant that she no longer had to worry about being sent to the palace one day, becoming the emperor's woman, and stepping into the same fate as in her previous life. Empress Dowager Ida had done this precisely for her sake. Seeing that her appearance was becoming more and more beautiful with each passing day, she also knew that Jiang Ruan's ambition did not lie here. Thus, she simply requested for a conferment to completely cut off the possibility of Jiang Ruan entering the palace. If someone passed by at this moment, they would certainly be shocked. Xia Yan, who had always been renowned in the capital as a talented woman, was spitting out such words. She really was like a shrew in the countryside. After that, there was a monotonous and repetitive ceremony. After the complicated ceremony was completed, Jiang Ruan accompanied Empress Dowager Ida back to the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. After 3 years, Empress Dowager Ida was somewhat happy to return to the palace. When the palace maids and eunuchs saw Jiang Ruan, they all behaved respectfully. Everyone knew that this Hong and princess was now a favorite of Empress Dowager Ida, and was also the apple of great General Zhao's eye. She also had an older brother who was known as the war god of the great Jin dynasty. It was no different from being doted on by tens of thousands of people and could not be offended. There was no need to mention Jiang Quan, who was in the crowd. When he saw the woman's features, he already knew that it was Jiang Ruan. His body could not help but tremble a little. He had always known that Jiang Ruan was born beautiful, and that she had inherited 70% of Zhao Mei's looks. However, he did not know that when this daughter grew up, she would be like a young phoenix that had shed her tender and immature feathers. Her entire body would be full of elegance, and her beauty would cause the downfall of a nation. This kind of beauty was enough to make men waver, but what she would bring to the Jiangfu might not necessarily be glory. Seeing Xia Yan like this, Li Momo hurriedly comforted her. "Furen, there is no need to bicker with that screwdriver. No matter how much he is doted on, if he cannot bear a child, isn't he at Furen's mercy? Men all seek novelty. Master was only momentarily bewitched by that foxy charmer. When she grows old and loses her beauty, and without a child by her side, she will certainly not have a good ending. When Furen gives birth to little young Master for Master, Master will naturally know that only Furen treats him sincerely. Furen has little young Master by her side, what is there to be afraid of? It's simple." He's beautiful face twisted in an instant. "I want that slut to lose all standing and reputation." Thinking of this, her brows involuntarily furrowed. After thinking for a while, she rejected this conjecture in her heart. Naturally, the news of Jiang Ruan's grand occasion in the palace had spread. Thinking of this, Xia Yan wished that she could tear Jiang Ruan to shreds. How could such good luck not fall on Jiang Su Su's head? Now that Jiang Su Su had just returned to the Fu, Jiang Ruan had chosen this time to come over. When the two sides were compared, the people outside could see it in their eyes. Who knew what kind of rumors would spread in the capital tomorrow? People always step on the weak and flatter the strong. Both of them had entered the family temple, but Jiang Ruan had returned in glory and splendor, while Jiang Su Su had only been in a horse carriage. In her heart, she was about to explode. Jiang Ruan had obviously done it on purpose. Jiang Su Su quietly looked at Jiang Ruan and suddenly smiled. "Dejijia, long time no see, you have become even more beautiful." Her expression was calm, and she really had a somewhat otherworldly attitude. But for some reason, her entire body exuded a special aura that even women could not help but feel a little moved. If one had to use a word to describe her, it would be a bewitching nun. Yes, Jiang Su Su's body still carried the fragrance of sandalwood. Her clothes were green, and she wore no makeup. She really did give off the feeling of an immortal nun. But each and every one of her movements actually carried a different kind of allure. Do not look, if you look, you will lose your soul. Jiang Yuan withdrew her gaze and smiled slightly. Second sister is far away and does not know. Now, the Empress Dowager has asked for me to be conferred the title of Hong and Junju. Although you and I are both sisters, and mother and I are also mother and daughter, rules cannot be abolished. If word of this gets out, I am afraid that it will be said that we are looking down on the imperial family. Therefore, Wang Yang boldly reminded me that in the future, it is better to establish the rules that should be established. Otherwise, if the imperial censors hear of this, they will have to report it to father. Jiang Su Su's originally calm face, when she heard these words, the muscles on her cheeks fiercely twitched, and unexpectedly became somewhat unnatural. She slowly raised her head to look at Jiang Yuan, and in a split second, the emotions in her eyes fluctuated like the wind and clouds. Finally, it returned to calmness. She smiled slightly and curtsied in front of Jiang Yuan. Sun Yang greets Junju. Jiang Yuan smiled and gestured for her to stand up. Xia Yan almost ground her teeth to pieces. Jiang Yuan thought for a moment, and her gaze fell thoughtfully on Xia Yan's lower abdomen. Mother, you can dispense with the formalities. Now that mother is pregnant, if your body is harmed, I am afraid that Wan Yang will not be able to escape the blame. When Xia Yan saw her gaze, she was frightened. Her hand subconsciously covered her lower abdomen, and she stared at her warily, forcing a smile. What are you saying? Jiang Yuan's smile became even more gentle. Mother is so protective. Those who don't know would think that I am going to do something to the child in mother's stomach. Mother worries too much. She turned her head and happened to see the way Jiang Su Su was looking at Xia Yan's stomach. Her eyes were astonishingly bright, and she actually felt a chill run down her spine. Jiang Yuan secretly became vigilant, and said with a smile, looking at second younger sister's appearance, it seems that mother is also very fond of the little fellow in mother's stomach. It seems that mother will soon be able to add a little brother to the fu. After saying this, she did not wait any longer, and with a smile, she ordered the servant girl to follow her into the fu. Xia Yan subconsciously turned to look at Jiang Su Su's gaze and was shocked by what she saw. The way Jiang Su Su looked at her lower abdomen was not one bit gentle or cute. It was as if she was not staring at her lower abdomen, but rather at a delicious dish, ready to pounce on it in the next second. He would eat her up cleanly. Xia Yan now regarded the child in her stomach as her lifeblood. Seeing Jiang Su Su's frightening gaze, she immediately took a step back. Her movement was too big, and Jiang Su Su regained her senses. The greed in her eyes immediately disappeared, and she smiled. Mother, I will also go in first. After saying this, she looked meaningfully at Xia Yan's lower abdomen, and slowly walked into the fu. Xia Yan stood rooted to the ground, still thinking about Jiang Su Su's gaze. She did not know why, but her heart turned cold. After staying in the fu for a few days, nothing out of the ordinary happened. The Empress Dowager casually rewarded them and brought them back to the Jiang Fu, but unexpectedly, no one dared to have any ideas. Jiang Chao followed Xianli outside all day and was busy, so when he entered the fu, he naturally did not see him. Moreover, Jiang Quan would not take the initiative to look for his daughter, Jiang Yuan, to have a heart-to-heart talk. Lu Zhu heard that in the past 3 years, Jiang Dan had become more and more reluctant to go out, and her temperament had become more introverted. The old Jiang madam's body had also begun to show signs of decline. On the day she returned to the fu, she had only called Jiang Yuan over to talk for a while before she became tired of talking. Xia Yan's pregnancy had already passed the first 3 months, so if she was carefully nurtured, she would naturally be fine. In her previous life, the child in Xia Yan's stomach was ultimately not born, and she miscarried a month later. At that time, it was discovered that it was 15 Yang Hongying who had done it. Jiang Quan was furious, and locked Hong Ying in the woodshed. However, Hong Ying found a rope and hung herself and died in the woodshed. Jiang Ruan's tone contained a hint of mockery. Immediately, the corners of Hong Ying's eyes twitched. However, the show still had to continue. A trace of worry suddenly appeared on her face. Speaking of this, eldest miss must laugh. This is precisely what this lowly concubine is worried about. Oh? What is there for Yin Yang to worry about? Jiang Ruan asked with a smile. This lowly concubine regards eldest miss as an intimate person, so I thickened my face and told eldest Mississippi. Although Furen's pregnancy is good, these past few years, because of Master, Furen has treated this lowly concubine with many misunderstandings. If young Master is born, who knows how this lowly concubine will react? Hong Ying's expression was anxious, as if she was very uneasy. Yin Yang's words are too serious. Jiang Ruan smiled and comforted her. Mother is compassionate, how could she react? Furthermore, father would not leave it be. If Yin Yang is wronged, father will be the first to not let her off. Hong Ying took out a handkerchief and wiped her eyes, wiping away the needless tears. She smiled bitterly and said, Master treats this lowly concubine well. This lowly concubine is blessed. But when a woman gives birth, it is always extremely dangerous. To put it bluntly, if something were to happen to Furen, and the blame is placed on this lowly concubine will be unable to voice out her bitterness. I am afraid that no matter what, I will not be able to wash away the injustice. This lowly concubine will be alone in this fu for the rest of my life. If I am really charged with that crime, I am afraid. I am afraid that even in death, I will not be able to leave a complete corpse. Jiang Ruan quietly looked at Hong Ying. Let's not talk about whether Hong Ying's words were true or false for the time being, but it could be seen that she was an intelligent person. She had even thought of this point. But since she had thought of this, how could she have fallen into Xia Yan's trap in her previous life? Jiang Ruan also did not believe that in her previous life, it was Hong Ying who caused Xia Yan to miscarry. In reality, Hong Ying was an extremely intelligent woman. She was very good at judging the situation. If there was a risk, she would not do something that she was uncertain about. Since this was the case, then the miscarriage was nothing more than a crime that Xia Yan had imposed on Hong Ying. But how did Xia Yan's child in her previous life die? Although she thought this way, Jiang Ruan still smiled at Hong Ying. Yin Yang's words are really too frightening. There are so many people in the fu to protect Furen's belly, what is there for Yin Yang to be afraid of? Ruan Yang feels that Yin Yang's top priority is not to study the child in Furen's belly, but to have a child of your own. She was an unmarried girl in the boudoir, yet she was openly discussing the matter of giving birth with the Fu's Yin Yang. Lu Zhu saw Jiang Ruan's expression, and was very pleased with herself. She said, Nubi felt strange, so I paid more attention, and found that it was really strange. Guess what? Lu Zhu really treated this place as a storytelling hall, and Lian Xiao could not wait any longer. She asked anxiously, what exactly happened? Butterfly and Dragonfly said that they wanted to make chicken soup, but there was nothing else besides the chicken. To make soup to nourish the body, angelica and red dates were still needed. Could it be that they just put the whole chicken in? Lu Zhu said, Nubi gave a maid in Su Xin Yuan 2 taels of silver, and let Nubi go look for it. Nubi brought along Xiao Huang, who was guarding the door. Xiao Huang's nose was very sharp, and he managed to find a dead chicken under a rose bush in Su Xin Yuan. All of its blood had been sucked dry, and its feathers were torn here and there. Lu Zhu still had some lingering fear. The wound was very hideous, and Nubi was scared just looking at it. I hurriedly buried the dead chicken and hurried back. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji did not speak, and their expressions became grave. After a while, Lian Xiao asked, Miss, could it be that second miss was possessed by a ghost? Otherwise, how could she know such sorcery? Miss, now that second miss is so strange, do you want to stay in the palace for a while? Second miss does not dare to follow the Empress Dowager, Bai Ji also reminded. Jiang Yuan looked at Lu Zhu. When you looked at the dead chicken, was it cut by a knife, and blood flowed in? No, Lu Zhu frowned. When Nubi was young, Nubi was playful, and the reed chicken of the ant next door pecked Nubi. Nubi chased after it and took a bite. Nubi saw the wound clearly, and it was not a knife wound, nor did it look like an animal bite. It looked more like a human bite. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao sucked in a breath of cold air. Jiang Yuan lowered her head in contemplation. Ever since she met Jiang Su Su at the Jiang Fu's gate a few days ago, Jiang Yuan felt that there was something wrong with Jiang Su Su. Although she could not say specifically, it was as if she had changed into a different person, and there was always a strange feeling about her. These days, Jiang Su Su did not leave Su Xian Yuan, and even rarely went to see Xia Yan. She stayed in the courtyard all day, and no one knew what she was doing. This was too abnormal, so Jiang Yuan ordered Lu Zhu to investigate, but she did not expect to find such a result. It was really unimaginable. Nubi also feels that second miss is really strange, Lu Zhu said. That day, I saw clearly that there were no scars on second miss's face. At that time, she suffered such a serious injury, but now there is no trace of it. If she is not a demon, how can she become like this? There are no demons and ghosts in this world, Jiang Yuan said lightly. Even if there were, she was not afraid. Xiao Xiao said, all right, tonight at the Zisher hour, I will come to find you. Jiang Yuan looked at him and asked, how will you come in? Although Xiao Xiao's martial arts were excellent, the Jiang Fu was not like a child's playhouse. Moreover, wandering around in the middle of the night with a young man at that, no matter how one looked at it, it felt somewhat wrong. However, the two of them were not ordinary people. Although Jiang Yuan felt a little strange, in the end, she would not be as pedantic as she had been in her previous life. Moreover, she was anxious to understand Jiang Su Su's matter. Don't worry, when the time comes, I will naturally come to find you. Xiao Xiao said. Jiang Yuan thought about it and nodded, then many thanks, Xiao Wangye. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji stood to one side, not making a sound, but they exchanged glances. Their own Mrs. Trust in Xiao Wangye was growing. As her personal maidservants, they were very clear about Jiang Yuan's temperament. Ever since she had woken up after falling into the water in the rural residence, she had become extremely vigilant and had never been willing to easily trust the people around her. Even towards her own maternal grandfather, Zhao Guang's family, she had some reservations. Although this Xiao Wangye's temperament was a little cold, he had helped Jiang Yuan a lot over the past few times. If they could form a marriage, the two maidservants thought in their hearts, it would be much better than marrying someone else. Naturally, Jiang Yuan did not know that her two personal maidservants had unknowingly sold her out. She lowered her head and continued to drink her tea. As she thought about being able to uncover Jiang Su Su's secret, her mood, which had been hazy for the past few days, became much more cheerful. You actually dared to bring such an unpresentable foo powder in front of me. Do you think that this lady is easy to deceive? Get out. A small round box was thrown out with a "pa" sound. The fine powder inside was scattered all over the floor, leaving tiny traces in the air. Jiang Li swept the things on the table onto the floor in an extremely dispirited manner, a bunch of trash. The maidservant beside her, Shi Lu, comforted her, Miss, don't be angry. In a few days, the people from Zhuolangzhong's Fu will arrive. At that time, Miss will be beautiful and bright. You should go happily. It would have been better if she had not said it, but once she did, Jiang Li was filled with anger. I don't understand. What's so bad about me that the Zhou family is still so displeased? They are actually so fixated on that sickly wretch. Shi Lu advised, Zhuolangzhong is a good person and will naturally keep his promises. It seems that he is only acting this way because of his promise to 4th Mississippi. When Miss marries, he will naturally treat Miss well. They really mistook fish eyes for pearls. Jiang Li said indignantly. It was like the nervousness she felt when Zhao Mei was still alive, and Jiang Xing had sneaked her out of the Fu to see the temple fair, and when they had crawled out of the dog's hole, afraid that they would be discovered. Within that nervousness, there was also a little excitement, as if she had returned to the time when she did not need to worry about anything. It was a kind of excitement that she had not felt for a long time, and it actually made her forget the fear of being brought into the air, and she became somewhat at a loss. Xiao Xiao saw that Jiang Yuan was unusually quiet, and could not help but lower his head to look at her. He saw that on that charming and beautiful little face, there was an expression of bewilderment and some cautious longing. It was a far cry from her usual calm and serene demeanor, as if this was how a young girl of her age should be. Seeing Jiang Yuan like this, Xiao Xiao was slightly stunned. His gaze fell on Jiang Yuan's tightly wrapped arms around his waist. Her slender and soft fingers tightly gripped his jet-black clothes, making them appear even more lustrous like jade. He did not know why, but he only felt that his waist, which was being held by those hands, was unconsciously becoming hot. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Xiao and Jiang Yuan landed in a courtyard. Jiang Yuan stood still and released her hands. At first glance, she was stunned. It was Su Xian Yuan. She looked at Xiao Xiao somewhat suspiciously. How did you know this place? Could it be that you've been here before? Xiao Xiao had entered and exited the Jiang Fu as if there was no one there, and had so easily found Jiang Su's courtyard. Xiao Xiao. Although it was indeed not his first time coming to Su Xian Yuan, the last time was when Jiang Yuan had castrated Li Yang. He had watched the entire scene from the top of the tree, and in the end, he had even lent Jiang Yuan a hand. However, it was better not to say it now. Genie checked and drew a map for me, he explained. Jiang Yuan nodded, so that's how it is. Her expression was one of disbelief, and Xiao Xiao felt even more helpless. The two of them walked to the corner of the courtyard, behind Jiang Su's room, where there was a small empty room. The two of them walked around the back of the empty room, and suddenly heard a strange sound. The sound was somewhat abrupt in the night sky, but they could still hear something similar. It sounded like something was struggling with all its might, and there was also something flopping on the ground, sweeping out a large noise. Xiao Xiao frowned, picked up a small stone from the ground, and flicked it at the window. A small hole quietly appeared in the window. Xiao Xiao stepped forward to take a look, and his expression slowly became serious. Seeing him like this, Jiang Yuan patted his arm. Xiao Xiao stepped back, and Jiang Yuan put her eyes to the small hole to take a look. Although Hong Ying had come from a brothel, she was gentle and sensible, and had a lofty character that Xia Yan did not have. If he could give birth to a son as talented as Hong Ying, even if he was a bastard son, he would still treat him with great care. Xia Yan was dignified, and Hong Ying was proud and aloof. With a lovely wife and beautiful concubines in his arms, a large number of children, and an official career that could be considered successful, wouldn't life be beautiful? Jiang Quan was still dreaming this beautiful dream, unaware that his beautiful concubine had just swallowed a medicine in the room when the maid pinged her asked, "Yinyang, do you still want water?" Hong Ying shook her head. It must be known that she had spent a large sum of money to obtain this medicine. After decocting it and drinking it, her pulse would have the tendency to move. Even if the physician came, he would not be able to detect any problems and would only treat it as a pulse of pregnancy. Now that she had already deceived the Fu's physician, and the physician that Xia Yan had invited also did not find anything strange, it could be assumed that she should be able to settle down for a while. She slowly relaxed, and her gaze slid over the shelf where Jiang Quan had sent people to deliver a small mountain of tonics. A proud smile appeared on her face. Jiang Yuan was just thinking about picking a time to see Hong Ying when she heard the little maid at the front door hurriedly run over and say to Lu Zhu, Jijia, there is a young lady outside kneeling in front of the Fu's door. She must want to see eldest Mississippi. Jiang Yuan walked out and asked the maid, looking for me? Who is it? The maid shook her head, I don't know. She looks like a young lady from an ordinary family, and she looks fair and clean. She only says that she is looking for Miss to repay a debt of gratitude, and refuses to say anything else. Jiang Yuan recalled Xiao Xiao's words from last night, thought for a moment, and said, all right, I will go and take a look. Just as she reached the Fu's door, she saw a young lady kneeling straight in front of the Jiang Fu's door. She looked to be about 17 or 18 years old, and was dressed in a green robe with her head lowered. Outside the Jiang Fu's door, a large crowd of commoners had already gathered to watch the commotion. They all wanted to see why this young lady had come. Jiang Yuan walked over and asked, are you looking for me? The young lady was kneeling with her head lowered, and when she suddenly heard Jiang Yuan's voice, she raised her head, revealing a delicate and pretty little face. Sure enough, it looked fair and clean. She said, Tianzhu has come to fulfill the vow we made that day, and henceforth will serve Mississippi. Jiang Yuan raised her eyebrows, but did not continue the conversation, and waited for her to continue. Sure enough, the young lady continued, at that time, Tianzhu's parents were harmed by roving bandits. In desperation, she wanted to sell her body to bury them, but was entangled by a scoundrel. Fortunately, Miss extended a helping hand, otherwise, she would have been torn apart and eaten by that scoundrel. At that time, Miss gave Tianzhu money to bury her parents, but left without saying anything. Miss is Tianzhu's benefactor, and now that she has finally found her benefactor, Tianzhu is willing to serve Miss forever. Hearing this, the crowd understood. Presumably, this eldest Miss of the Jiang family's D family had the heart of a bodhisattva. At that time, she had saved someone and left without leaving her name. Fortunately, the person who had received her kindness also understood the principle of a drop of water being repaid with a gushing spring, so she eagerly came to repay her kindness. Jiang Yuan looked at the young lady who called herself Tianzhu. On her face, there was a mixture of gratitude and grief. She really did look like she was repaying a debt of gratitude, and was indeed an excellent actress. However, in her heart, Jiang Yuan was somewhat speechless. What did Xiao Xiao mean by this? To fabricate such a life story for Tianzhu, could it be that he wanted to conveniently praise her character and give her a good reputation among the common people? This did not matter. She was used to hearing the name of a demoness, and the heart of a bodhisattva, but now, it really did not suit her. Since you wholeheartedly want to repay my kindness, if I really wanted you to go back, you would not be willing. Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, then, you can stay by my side. Being so direct and efficient, the crowd of onlookers was stunned. That young lady was also somewhat incredulous. According to common sense, a normal woman would not say, I saved you not to ask you to repay my kindness, you should go back, and so on. Jiang Yuan accepted it so readily, so wasn't her words just now a waste? However, this young lady was only stunned for a moment, and then she respectfully said, Miss, please bestow me a name. No need, your original name is quite pleasant to hear. Let's call it Tianzhu. Tianzhu nodded, yes, Mississippi. Jiang Yuan dismissed the people outside and brought this newly hired maidservant back to the courtyard. Once back at Wanzhou, Jiang Yuan entered the room. Lu Zhu was outside watering the flowers, and when she saw Tianzhu, she blinked and looked at her curiously. Tianzhu followed Jiang Yuan back into the room, and Lian Qiao and Bai Ji retreated and closed the door, leaving Jiang Yuan and Tianzhu alone. Jiang Yuan seriously sized up the young lady in front of her. Being alone with her in the room, Tianzhu was not as meek and humble as she had been at the entrance of the Jiangfu. Her whole person exuded a kind of cold temperament, and there was a hint of Xiao Xiao's shadow. Perhaps it was because she was getting on in years, and did not pay attention to maintaining her appearance. She was like a completely different person from her usual elegant and beautiful appearance. Although she was also pregnant, Hong Ying had become even more tender and beautiful. It was unknown whether it was because she was pregnant, but her entire complexion had become much rosier. Unlike Xia Yan, although her pregnancy had gradually begun to show, she cleaned herself up very quickly every day. Compared to her proud and aloof appearance of the past, she had a few traces of a woman's charm after becoming pregnant, and she was even more radiant. On one side was his wife, who had put on some weight, and on the other side was his even more beautiful and alluring concubine. Jiang Quan was usually not a person who coveted beauty, but men, after all, liked fresh and beautiful things. Moreover, Xia Yan had already given birth to Jiang Su and Jiang Chao, and Hong Ying was carrying his first child. Although Jiang Quan also ordered people to take care of Xia Yan attentively, he ran to Jiang Su's courtyard more frequently. In terms of status, you and second young miss deserve it. Moreover, third young miss and fourth young miss are indeed a bit young. In her heart, Jiang Ruan almost laughed in spite of herself. Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were both young ladies of marriageable age. The four of them were similar in age, so it was necessary to differentiate between the Di and Shu wives. There was nothing wrong with this, but it was Xia Yan who had brought it up. Jiang Ruan ordered Bai Ji to receive the Chouyu silk thread and said to Du Wan, "If that's the case, then I'll have to trouble Du Wan Jia to thank Zimo on my behalf." Du Wan hurriedly smiled and declined, "Eldest miss, you are going to make this servant suffer." She looked at Jiang Ruan's smiling appearance and sighed in her heart. Normally, Jiang Ruan did not put on airs. Even after she had been promoted to Junju, she did not deliberately request the servants to treat her with the courtesy of a Junju. However, as long as she stood there and glanced over, it would make people's hearts feel heavy. It was as if she had the demeanor of a noble in the palace. After chatting with Jiang Ruan for a while, Du Wan hurriedly left. After Du Wan left, Jiang Ruan ordered Bai Ji and Lian Chao to open the Chouyu silk thread that Du Wan had brought. The Chouyu silk thread originated from the Persian region and was very rare in the Great Jin dynasty. It would not be an exaggeration to say that such a bolt was worth 100 taels of gold. In fact, it was a brightly colored silk thread. Sure enough, as soon as Du Wan and Bai Ji opened it, Lu Zhu exclaimed in surprise. The silk thread was as white as jade and seemed to emit the faint luster of a pearl. Just looking at it would make one endlessly happy. If it was used to embroider a flower on a piece of clothing, she would really be in the limelight among the noble ladies of the capital. Lu Zhu excitedly said, "This silk thread is really beautiful. Why not let Tianzhu embroider a flower?" No, a flower is too vulgar. It would be a waste of such beautiful silk thread. Why not embroider a firefly? Tianzhu's hands are so dexterous, she would definitely be able to do a wonderful job. Tianzhu walked to the front of the Chouyu silk thread and stretched out her hand to gently stroke the silk thread. Lu Zhu said with distress, "Be gentler. Don't damage the silk thread." Just as she finished speaking, she saw Tianzhu bend down and gently sniff at the silk thread. Jiang Ruan looked at her thoughtfully. After a moment, Tianzhu straightened up and stretched out her hand to roll up the Chouyu silk thread and put it aside. Her eyebrows quietly wrinkled. Jiang Ruan looked at her thoughtfully and asked, "What's the problem?" "The Chouyu silk thread itself is not a problem," Tianzhu said, "but this bolt has a kind of perfume added to it. When combined with the Chouyu silk thread, it will have a special effect." Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows. "What effect?" Killing two birds with one stone would not only get rid of the child in Hong Ying's belly, but it would also give Jiang Ruan a vicious reputation. So what if she was a Junju? With such a crime weighing on her, she similarly could not bear it. Xia Yan's masterful calculation really made people gasp in amazement. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. After waiting for so long, this soft tortoise had finally stretched out its limbs. Since it had moved, it would depend on who was more agile. Tianzhu muttered to herself, "Miss, should this subordinate exchange this silk thread with Jiang Su's?" Even though she was now with Jiang Yuan, Tianzhu still referred to herself as subordinate as if she was with Xiao Xiao. "There is no need to use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken," Jiang Yuan shook her head. "There is no need for you to take action, someone will solve this problem for us." Since Xia Yan wanted to deal with Hong Ying, how could Hong Ying not retaliate? She asked Tianzhu, "You know poison?" "I once followed Master to deal with the people of the southern frontier, so I know a little." "The spice on it is not rare," Tianzhu said. "Very good, is there a way to detoxify it?" "I will try." As usual, when Hong Ying came to Wanju, she took the tea that Bai Ji had poured for her and looked at Jiang Ruan's clothes with some surprise. "Your embroidery is very beautiful, the silk thread seems to be glowing." On Jiang Ruan's bright red chrysanthemum pattern, a snow-white luan was clearly embroidered. The embroidery was very exquisite, and the luan was vivid and lifelike. The silk thread also faintly emitted a kind of pearl color, which made the luan seem as if it was about to fly out of the clothes. Jiang Yuan smiled, "The Choyu silk thread that Zuma sent is very beautiful. If Yinyang likes it, you can take the remaining silk thread back." This kind of silk thread was very rare, and Hong Ying was very fond of beauty. When she heard this, she was overjoyed and immediately took the material back. After Hong Ying left, Tianzhu looked at Jiang Yuan strangely. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Miss, why did you do this? Wouldn't it be better to have Nubi exchange the silk thread?" "Naturally, it's not good." Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. "Xia Yan naturally needs to be dealt with, but Hong Ying is too clever. For a clever person, if there is no leverage, it is difficult to guarantee their future intentions." Of course, Jiang Yuan did not tell Tianzhu the most important reason. Because of her relationship with Pei, in her previous life, although she would not pity the child in Xia Yan's womb, she would not take the initiative to kill it. Letting Tianzhu make a move was one thing, and guiding Hong Ying to do it was another. In her previous life, Xia Yan and Jiang Su had been very proficient in using a borrowed knife to kill people. In this life, she would not be bad.